I'll call this meeting to order. It was a regular meeting of the Board of Directors of the Bolinas Community Public Utility District. Today is March the 18th, 2026. All directors are present. The board met in closed session from 5 to 6 and took no action. With that, I can ask for community expression. Any matter that a member of the audience, either on Zoom or in person, would like to address the board on a subject which is not on the agenda and for which we can take no action, but we're willing to entertain a brief discussion on any subject you wish. Is there anyone that has a community expression item?
I want to point out something.
Sure.
For the community, there's a stoplight in town now. You may have seen it. The road up the Little Mesa is now, the one-way road up the Little Mesa is now a two-way road. So there's a stoplight at the top and bottom. It's on a 4-minute cycle. If you're driving down Brighton and not turning up to Little Mesa, you don't have to stop at the stoplight. It's very confusing. But do stop the stoplight if it's red and you want to go up to Little Mesa. Please don't run the red because there may be traffic coming the other way. Thank you.
Very good. That's good
Do
information.
you know the timing?
4 minute. 4-minute cycle.
That's a long.
It's long. Yeah.
And how did they determine that? Is that what it takes?
It
to
takes a
hike
minute and a
that
half
to-
to 2 minutes to get up. So
Okay.
then, it's red on both sides for 2 minutes and then, yeah, depending on what it is. Yeah.
Any other community expression items? No.
Oh, do I?
Okay,
intended.
the last item, under this heading is to consider amending the order of items in the agenda. Are there any items you want to readjust?
Yeah, can we please move item 12, I believe it is? Special reports or updates, no action requested, exploration of possible treated water sources to support public pool facilities. Simon's here,
Okay,
and like to move him up to the top.
okay, where should we put that?
You could put it right at number 1.
Okay, thanks, Simon.
Thank you.
Any other items? No.
We could, sorry.
I'm so you don't get treated well around here. What if I get treated water?
Well, water.
Well treated. All right. Enough.
I think if you guys don't mind, also moving items 8 and 9 forward. Folks have come here to pay attention to those items.
Oh, okay, shall we move them up after? item
Yeah,
12?
after 12.
Got it.
And then I don't,
okay,
let me just quickly look in the
Sure,
participants. Yeah, that should be good.
all right. With that, I'm gonna go on to the heading of action items, public hearings, receipts and notices, and I'm going to call item 12, exploration of possible treated water sources to support a public pool facility at Mesa Park. Simon Dunn.
Yeah.
Thank you. Joe, do you want to introduce this or should I?
You can introduce it. I think
Okay.
the memo basically was essentially a distillation of meetings that I'd had with and conversations with Simon, just trying to gather pertinent information. Like I said on the outset, this isn't on for action, but it's just sort of a point for you guys to decide whether you want us to start pursuing these lines of action further.
So I can give a little background and then maybe you could just introduce those potential approaches that you've listed.
Yep.
So you know more about what that means.
You think you could come around?
I'd love to. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Sit.
You can sit, yeah.
So I had been, I think last year to discuss with you filling a swimming pool and what that might mean from a BPA perspective. And I think we got to a pretty good place there just as a discussion. There's been no commitments made, there's no pool. So, but basically what I heard was that a pool could be filled during the winter months when we have excess capacity. And a pool actually only needs to be filled every 3 to 5 years. So we could plan it for particularly wet seasons. So I feel like filling a pool is possible with water that we have coming through Bolinas, and I'm less worried about that. What this is about is ongoing water needs of the swimming pool and the facilities that support it, so the showers and the sinks, basically toilets could run off of a gray water system, but showers and sinks would need to be treated water. So basically a pool is gonna have evaporation, it's gonna have spillage, and then there's a backwash, so every I think it's sort of every 5 or 7 days, the filters clean themselves out with water, and they use a significant amount of water for that. And so I'm trying to understand how much water we have up at Mesa Park, which is the identified spot where a swimming facility could go, and then how we might fill the shortfall, because we will have a gap there. So what I communicated to Georgia was my best understanding as of now, and this is still, the numbers are vague because we don't have a facility, we don't have a design yet. So take it with a grain of salt, but basically understanding that we would need 150 to 220 gallons per day of evaporation and spillage, and then another 250 to 350 shower sinks drinking water for the facilities. And Georgia communicated to me that our current allowance at Mesa Park is 200, has an available 280 gallons per day. And so our shortfall ends up being about 270 gallons per day. So we were discussing just possible ways to help fill that shortfall, if any. And so Georgia proposes here a few different options for exploration. So maybe she could speak to that.
Yeah, so I mean, these are not things that we could obviously do now, even if this was on for action. It's more like what is theoretically possible. So, and obviously that would need support from the board and potentially even further legal exploration and stuff. So I just want to make that clear. But you know, obviously, I think it's pretty easy to argue that the pool offers a public benefit. And so we get into this kind of territory that affordable housing has gotten into, where essentially you make exceptions for swapping and stacking and kind of looking at the overall water allocation that sort of an agency is able to take advantage of, and whether there's a possibility to move stuff around. So, and by stuff, I mean water allowances. So, so the way, you know, the direction that my brain went was just thinking about the downtown park and the resource recovery well. And those are basically the water that Mesa Park Agency has access to. So one of the things I was saying to Simon is that the Mesa's downtown park, so that's like an interesting kind of history, and I printed out just a letter that Jennifer had written to, it looked like Alethea at the time that the downtown park was being developed. And just to note that, you know, this is not uncommon, but basically I think you know, the understanding was the downtown park was just emerging. They didn't really know what their water needs were going to be down there. There was a meter down there. And obviously, you know, in the sort of normal course of, oh, this is a development, we can look at instituting a limited water use permit, except the historical data for what the park actually needed wasn't there. So that is a strand that needs to be kind of cleaned up, is probably we have enough data now for you guys to think about instituting a limited water use permit on that meter downtown. And what then, once you understand sort of what that limit is there a capacity for Mesa Park, through its management of the downtown park, to decrease the water usage there and effectively swap that limit up to Mesa Park proper for the actual pool? So that's kind of one idea. Again, this gets into, you know, Mesa Park territory and your management. One of the things, this is, you know, again, outside of your kind of purview, but just to point out, there's a well there. It's not a super productive well, especially in the summer, because my understanding is that it just wasn't dug very deep. They hit water and they thought it was going to be sufficient to fulfill their needs. But maybe there would be a possibility of basically redeveloping that well, and that would give you an opportunity to, more heavily depend on the well, and then essentially move your city water use from down there to up at Mesa Park. Oh, Belle is admitting people. Hopefully she saw.
Oh yeah, I am.
Yeah, so that's, we can look at the numbers, but that's sort of like a general idea. Is the board receptive to this? I think appropriately, if you are, then we would essentially look back at the language right now. There's a resolution, an amendment resolution that sits on top of our limited water use permit resolution that effectively talks about an exception and these sort of swap and stacks that are like available to affordable housing. So the question before the board is, are you guys amenable to sort of expanding that to be, and I think even the language there is broadly written in some ways where it talks about public benefit. So maybe there's even an interpretation of that section that allows you to even do this now. However, in my first kind of cursory reading of it, it's pretty it's expressly written about affordable housing, and it may just make more sense to just amend that section. And then there's another kind of complicated issue, which I don't know if anybody has questions about that first part of it. Okay.
Well, I might.
Okay.
Whether it's appropriate right now or not, but you mentioned us voting now sooner than later, and I'm wondering how quickly do we need to vote to support this pool? And then the other thing is, what are the other potential uses that could require more water use that's being proposed for Mesa Park beyond just the pool and or gym that we should be considering if we do a LWOP?
Okay. So I guess the first thing I would say is it's not on for action, so I don't think you guys should take a formal vote. I think this is more a directive of, we're supportive for you to, because it's sort of hard for you guys to make a decision without a vote, I recognize. But at the same time, you guys could just say, we're really not interested in this and we don't think it's, within our capacity to do this. And then we would just basically stop exploring it. So this to me is more a directive of, hey, staff, continue to pursue this. We are interested in these types of solutions to this, to helping get more water up there to support the pool. So that would be the first thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And from my perspective right now, I'm planning sort of public information sessions. And I know I'll get questions about, well, where's the water coming from? What are you doing with the water? And so while I don't think it's important to have a vote and a decision at this exact moment, it would be good for me to be able to speak to some of the things that are being considered by both Mesa Park and BPUD, if anything is being considered.
Yeah, and maybe what makes sense is at the end of this, we can decide, like this discussion, we can decide whether just even a broad vote next meeting that would not say, hey, we're going to do X or Y, but the board is broadly supportive of X and or Y. So that you can have, when you talk to people publicly, you can, say the board took a vote. And if obviously some of you are not supportive, then you can make your, your opinion clear. So, so I'll just, any other questions about sort of the swap and stack from the sort of traditional swap and stack from their existing water downtown? Okay. So then the other idea that I was thinking about is basically this idea of when our well, particularly the resource recovery well, because as you guys know, the primary use of that water is irrigation of the ball fields. And as you know, Mesa Park ponied up a lot of money to make that project happen. As it so happens, now we have a drought well project that is treating that, through a grant funds to treat that water. And I don't know, several months ago, remember we had a agreement put in place with Mesa Park to more clearly define that sort of mutual beneficial relationship of how we are benefiting from the infrastructural improvements that they made and the development of that well and all of that. So the way that that is, and I'm not going to get into the details of any of the numbers tonight because I don't think it's worth going into the weeds to that level. But what I would like to say is that the way that that water is managed currently is that it's effectively has essentially a limit that's sort of is considering a responsible management of the resource. Okay. And that resource is basically primarily used to water the ball fields, but it's also used by resource recovery and the turning of their piles and the actual management of the green waste facility. And it's also used by Mickey. Well, when we come on board and have a treated water, effectively the Division of Drinking Water and also our coastal development permit, we had to make clear that we would, manage that resource responsibly, and we weren't just going to effectively come on top of that water use. We were going to essentially look at the sort of maximal water use, and if we are, say, in a period of drought where we need to use that water to supplement the Arroyo Hondo, then effectively that would come off of, some other use of it. So for instance, the ball fields would not be watered during that period. Okay, so all of that to say is that really Mesa Park is, has not a legal right because it's through an agreement and it's our well, but basically they use that water. And so one of the things we're going to have to do, and it's not potable, that's not treated water. It's not a situation where you could use that water at present to fill the pool or run the showers or anything like that. So that's not the idea here. But the idea is when we begin to treat water from the well, and we'll need to, as a matter of operation, we're going to have to feed water back into the system, treated water back into the system, just as a daily operation. And the reason for that, as you can imagine, is that if we just treated the water and let it sit there, it would dechlorinate, and it, we essentially, if there's some sort of emergency where we need to use that water, we have to be testing on our normal biweekly test cycles and ensure that the water is properly treated in order to use it. So what that means is that there's effectively some supplement. I'm not sure exactly what that is yet, but I'm guessing it's probably based on, the size of the tanks and how quickly we need, or how the rate at which we need to turn that water over. It's probably about 200 gallons per day. So one idea is whether the board would be amenable to effectively allotting that treated water to essentially increase the LWIP associated with their existing LWIP at Mesa Park. So I'm sorry that's complicated, but that was just sort of an idea of how we might kind of move some puzzle pieces around. And I think, obviously, I would guess we probably want to get legal review on all of that, but it seems to me, at least superficially, to be within the confines of the moratorium, in that this water was not part of our system water and we're bringing it on. It's on top of basically our existing water from the Arroyo Hondo. So those are kind of the two broad ideas. One other idea to throw out there is we'll have a similar situation at 31 Wharf, where that one will have to be similarly, dispelled on a daily basis. And that could be something where we're essentially, maybe that is through a public benefit going towards irrigating the downtown park or something like that. Again, I think the more obvious sort of connection to the resource recovery and the fact that Mesa Park's already using that source, that's a more natural kind of rationale for using that water in that way. But I think it's also perfectly reasonable to say, hey, we've effectively supplemented, we're going to have this supplemental source that we need to feed into our system. That could be sort of a public, through a resolution or something, a public increase to one of the Mesa Park LWEPs.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting study of how we calculate converting to an LWAP or new use that has no historical use on the pool. And as I was saying, if we are looking to add program, would there be an opportunity to add supplemental water or water meters in future to stack? To your point, I think that's something, I don't know, do we already know that from council? But I think that's something I would want to ask from council.
Well, there's concerns over the moratorium and how everything we're talking about would affect the moratorium.
Mhm.
So I was involved a lot with the whole Mesa Park creation and everything you've been talking about. So I'll share with you a few of the considerations that came up at the time. When we decided to try to dig the well down at Resource Recovery, we didn't know how much water we would find or what the quality of it was or the quantity, okay? But our biggest concern was that we had no emergency source of water during a drought. And we had hit a couple of years when the creek stopped running and the reservoirs were going down, and we were really wondering where the water was going to come from. And having dug that well, we did strike water, but we were never quite sure how much there was in that aquifer or what the quality would be, because as it got drained down for irrigation, it would kind of change its quality, and to the point where we'd actually have to stop using it and let it sort of replenish. Because some people said, well, if you have water to water the fields, then why don't you just hook up a house or something? And we said, well, we can't, because once you hook up a house, and they're guaranteed potable water from forever, and there's no guarantee on that water source. But if it's being used by the park to irrigate the play fields, you can always just say, you know what, you're gonna have to let the grass die because we're out of water, and
Mhm.
you can't use that. Secondly, the downtown park had a little well that was dug in the back, and you're right, it's a relatively shallow well.
Mhm.
And so they were gonna use it for irrigation. The water meter that goes with the downtown park serves the public bathrooms.
Mhm.
And I hope that they're not using it for irrigation anymore. In the beginning, they were, and it was very costly, and it was not a good use of that water meter. So at this point, I think if you just use that shallow well for irrigation, then you're only talking about the bathroom sinks and the water fountain at downtown. So the meter that serves the downtown park could well have, I don't mean, could have excess water, at least that's not being used, that, as Georgia says, could be stacked.
Well, I don't know, and you can probably speak more to this, but having been married to somebody who served on the Mesa Park Board, I think that they have been using that water because basically they can't maintain that park without supplemental irrigation. So I think in some ways though gives them, I mean, maybe that was not part of the deal. I can't speak obviously to that.
Yeah.
But my understanding is that's been a huge expense.
Yeah.
Because especially during the summer where they can't rely on the well, but they also want to maintain like a nice park for people to be in. And it means that they need to use some of that city water. It's very expensive. It's not, and obviously Mesa Park has a very limited budget. And so though in some respects that gives you a little more flexibility though, because that means that you've been using city water for irrigation purposes. It's probably really hard if your limit was just basically the toilets and running the bathroom, there's probably not much, not a place to go from there. However, if you have been using, especially in, peak summer, whatever, periods, city water to maintain, you know, the kind of like grass and whatever that maybe through development of the well, you can actually augment its production.
Mhm.
But anyway, so
Well, what about storage tanks? I mean, if there's supplemental water that we
Yeah.
could be storing.
yeah, exactly. So I think, I mean, I mean, we have a 3-year usage. I was thinking, I haven't looked at it closely for the downtown park. Because that was one thing, Kevin, you were asking about. I think looking into that data a little bit further, understanding how it's being managed right now, because that's where you'll get your flexibility, right? If you can just basically look at that, define an LWUP associated with your, you know, however the board thinks is an appropriate way to define an LWUP there. And then effectively that is the maximum allotment you know, that meter has historically used, and then you're bringing it down from there. And then you're not augmenting water use anywhere in like confirmation with the moratorium. You're basically doing exactly what BCLT does, which is essentially we're moving this allotment from property X to property Y.
Yeah.
So a big part of it will be, you know, what is the capacity for, you know, diminishing the water use downtown.
And the water should also be used for, I think if it's potable water, you could just use it for the drinking fountain and the sinks. Wouldn't need it for the toilet, you could use recycled water.
Right.
And the same would be with the water that waters the grass, so that would substantially cut
Yeah.
down on that water.
Yeah.
So that's a possibility. We've
Okay.
never known for sure what the resource recovery well would produce. There was always a fear that if you tapped into it too much, you know, you would ruin the quality of the water.
Yeah,
There'd be
I mean-
saltwater incursion, was the problem, was the worry.
Just to be clear though, like through our management of through the management of the resource recovery well, we don't obviously have this historic data for the 31 wharf. So that one's a little bit like more up in the air. But through the resource recovery well, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact number, but there is a maximum amount. That is the maximum that we presented to the county for our coastal development permits. And we expressly said, hey, when our water, you know, our potable use of this well comes online, that will not mean an augmentation of use. It will mean a you know, a movement, a transfer of use. So basically we'll still be using that same amount. It's just in an emergency, for instance, like the context, just to remind everybody in which we would be using the well water is one through the daily management that I just talked about before, right? Which is just basically we need to use a bit every day just to ensure that we can use it at the drop of a hat during an emergency. And those emergencies are, as Jack talked about, drought. So I think in that context, like everything goes out the window, right? Obviously, we're not watering ball fields and all of that. We're basically drawing from the well because it's a drought and we're needing to supplement the Arroyo Hondo for potable sources to serve, you know, people, residents. The other context is basically often we can't run our treatment facility during storms because the waters become too turbid. So those are usually shorter periods of time, but we can get into kind of predicaments where effectively we haven't treated water for several days and our tanks are coming down. And so it would be really great to be able to have this other source to supplement. As you can imagine, that's not as, you know, usually a storm means rain and all of that. So that is not usually a period in which we're really, you know, concerned about usage. But it does mean that there's kind of very set circumstances in which we're using that water. And I think that we can, you know, still like I was saying, in where this gets really constrained is during drought and all of that. And I think that even in terms of our LWUPs, like this is something just to impart to the community at large, right? Like our minimum LWUP is 2,700 cubic feet per quarter. That all goes out the window if we're in severe drought. And similarly, in terms of, oh, Park is allotted this much water from the well, and Mickey is allotted this much water, or however you're figuring that, it's all out the window in a case of drought, and we're then, maybe not supplementing, the pool is shut or the ball fields aren't irrigated, right? So I think that we already have to manage those resources in a responsible way, and that responsible way is effectively is not the same. It's context dependent, right? So we would manage the resource much differently during a period of drought than we would during just kind of status quo responsible management.
Can you just remind me, this is somewhat related, how do we manage the majority of water meters that don't have a limit during the drought?
So I've fortunately not been here for a drought yet, so probably Grace or Jack can talk to this better, or even Belle. But my understanding is that we declare a drought emergency. We have then put limits that apply across the board. And then we are managing on, unfortunately, like a daily basis and targeting people that are going above that limit.
Thank you.
To add to that, this town is incredibly responsible about lowering their water use during droughts. We, in the last bad one, correct me where I go astray here, we did put in theoretical limits and we had sort of a tiered approach, but that sign down at the corner helps, so much, and people are incredibly responsive. We have not had to be draconian because the town steps up.
Yeah.
It's been really, we were sort of preparing for the worst, but we wound up being able to land on,
Yeah.
the community effort.
Yeah.
So that was good.
But the idea too that if the pool is gonna be at least partially dependent on supplementing the water from the resource recovery well, and suddenly we were in a drought and that was being used for emergency water, then just as we would have to let the grass die, then the pool might have to be closed during that period of time for lack of water or something, but it doesn't. But only lasts during the drought period and then reopen. So I misunderstood it was a conditional kind of situation because of the uncertainties of how long a drought lasts and what that well might actually provide.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and just one kind of technical point around this, because I think it's confusing, but to be clear, like we'll treat water up there, it actually will go and be served into a main on Mesa Road. And really what we would be doing is giving them a larger allotment to get water through their normal meter. It's not like resource recovery well is coming back directly into the pool. It's basically just supplementing our overall
It's going into the same.
Production.
yes,
But
production,
likely-
thank you.
Likely that allotment gets cut off during a drought.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it kind of naturally goes out the window because you can imagine we're doing that through daily operations. And then if it's like, oh, has to come on, and like I said, it really depends on the nature of that emergency. So if it's like a winter storm, then really there's no reason to cut off, very likely, because the water's plentiful at that time. But if we're having to bring it online because of drought, then, and that's already something that I think Mesa Park is used to in terms of resource recovery well use. There have been periods where effectively, just I think not even obviously we weren't using it, but just through a responsible management of the resource, it's just didn't feel appropriate to be watering the field during drought.
I have a couple quick comments.
Sure.
Simon, so glad that you're talking about this, by the way. Very into it, into the idea. Thank you. have you talked to any other pool managers in drought prone areas? Like, how do people in Palm Springs have so many pools, and do they just have an abundant underground supply of water? Like, or probably more relevant would be a municipal pool in a place like that. Like, how do they deal with the droughts, and
I haven't done that research yet. I haven't got into water sourcing so much with other pools.
Yeah.
Thinking our not sure why, just that we have a specific scenario here, but there's
Yeah.
probably a lot of
could be?
insight between there, yeah.
Okay, I had a couple ideas, a couple new ideas. One would be, since we're looking at an amendment to the LWUP ordinance, what if property owners could slice off increments of their surplus LWUPs and donate it to a cause such as the pool? So let's say someone has a big LWUP, but they typically don't use all of it. Could they slice off, 100 cubic feet per quarter increments? So that would be an idea for an amendment if the board would be willing to consider that. Again,
Or trade their meter.
trade their meter.
Like if I had 5,400 cubic
Mhm.
feet per quarter and
Trade it for
you had
27.
27, could you just be like, I'm only using 700 per
Yeah,
quarter, here you go.
yeah.
Thought you meant for a pool membership.
Well, there's that.
For a tile, right? A tile.
Yeah.
Full membership.
Get a tile. No, just trying to think creatively about. Again, this isn't a guarantee of water, but it's kind of a way to reshuffle things, rejigger the LWUPs that we have already in existence that may not be utilized. So that was an idea. Also wondering about treating wastewater, and I know that's something that's come up in BPUD meetings in the past. I think with innovations in like UV treatment, there may be something there that we could explore for either the irrigation at Mace Park or something. So just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, so I can just speak to one thing around that. The Ocean Protection Council grant, like obviously a big part of our tech order associated with the treatment facility is increasing our capacity and to treat wastewater. Part of the things that those types of feasibility studies look at, although it's very expensive, is basically recycled water. We actually already have a permit because there was an idea that we were going to do that at some point. So we already have the permit to do it. It's basically developing the actual infrastructure to do that. I think definitely if you're recycling that back up to like irrigation, like quality, that becomes a lot more of a realistic option. And you could imagine in something like that, like, okay, what we're really doing is developing that program. That water, that recycled water is irrigating the ball fields. That liberates more of resource recovery water. And we're now have our treatment facility up and running. And so that effectively is, essentially a supplement that is allowing the pool to draw on that like water.
So, of the two things that you mentioned, both of which have been subject of discussion off and on for a long time, the idea of treating wastewater to a potable standards is definitely considered in the past, and we, in a study on it, concluded that we could do it. That the technology was there. It was expensive, although it's been a few years, and maybe they've improved it. But you do see these things periodically where a guy in the news is taking a glass of water from a thing and drinking it, and then it came from over there. So in other words, that can be done, and you just have to look into what the current technology is. But the BPUD has all of this extra water that it has to get rid of too. We spray all the spray fields to just kind of get rid of that water before the next rainy season. So the spraying occurs during the dry season, so the timing is good on that as well in terms of that.
That's wastewater, sorry.
It is
That's
wastewater,
wastewater,
but it's been treated. It's gone through 3 settlement ponds, so by the time the 3rd pond has it and it's sprayed, it's a much less toxic, if that's the word.
Yeah, I mean, we can't legally spray it on the irrigation. You can't use it for irrigation right now. It needs to be on the spray field. But basically, like I was saying, part of that grant is effectively looking at, okay, because the more water we can get like the easier we can get rid of that water, to Jack's point, the more capacity for wastewater we can bring in. And basically the regional board has told us you need to augment your, your, the total volume that you can treat here.
Yeah.
And so the idea is if we get sort of those next secondary treatments in place, then effectively it could be at a water quality that it can't be used for potable use, but it can be used for irrigation.
Right.
Then, on your first point, though, that subject has come up before where you get people to basically donate a portion of their allotted water towards a common cause. And in my years on the VPUD, whenever that came up, it was always said that, and I don't know where you find it in our ordinances, but you can't basically give some of your water to somebody else to use
Okay.
on their parcel.
Yeah.
Because then theoretically, you could get a group of, I don't know, 8 or 10 people, and they could create essentially the equivalent of a new water meter, which is prohibited by the VPUD.
Well, you're not donating it to an empty parcel, you're donating it to another meter, so it's sort of like a swap.
Mhm.
Or
Yeah, I think that
it's a
what
form of a
what
stack.
Andrew was talking about is probably a cleaner version of that, where you'd literally transfer the 2 meters, right? That seems very
swap,
within
yeah,
the
swap.
context
Yeah,
of
that's
our.
different, yeah.
Yeah.
Now that one, and we have just approved that for the land trust, so,
Mhm.
but that, yeah, then each parcel is using a meter. It's just that
Yeah.
their allotments are
Yeah, swap.
traded, yeah. But the idea of a
Slicing.
group of people,
Yeah.
chipping off some of theirs has never been acceptable. So
Until now.
anyway, I think in general, Simon, you preaching to the choir here.
No, I'm loving the support and the creativity is really great to see. Appreciate you guys. So yeah, I'm excited about the possibilities.
Can't wait to go swimming.
Yeah.
Today's a good day to have. this.
Yeah.
All right.
So maybe what I can do is bring forward, like I said, something that's a little more concrete for you guys to vote on. And it would be like, are you interested in pursuing option A, which would be, say, what I was describing, where, you move it like a swap and stack or whatever. Are you interested in option B? And you can vote on all of those separately, and that will give you a better sense of what what you have to work with.
Okay, that would be great. I wonder if in that we could include also the filling of the pool every 3 to 5 years.
Yeah.
Hopefully from excess capacity, it's probably 80,000 gallons. I don't know if that's realistic or not.
We always
Yeah.
felt that if you just did it in the winter time when the dam was
Yeah.
overflowing, then there was water
Lots.
going into the ocean anyway, yeah.
Well, that's why I'm also asking about storage.
Mhm.
If we have to cull water periodically off of these wells just to make sure that they're active, could we not be putting that into some kind of storage tank?
Yeah.
Obviously, it has to be filtered. That would ensure that that water is actively available, but also it's not depleting it at one time, right?
Yeah.
Because we're able to store it and allow it to fill back, that aquifer to fill back up. I don't know, I think it's just worth exploring.
Yeah.
Storage.
Yeah, the other thing is, I don't know if you've talked to Stinson Water at all,
Haven't.
because they have a lot more water than we do. And so, and I wonder to what, to what extent they would be amenable.
Stinson is a key part of the development of the pool. So
Yeah, I think it would just make sense to just
Yeah.
understand what those options are and
Yeah.
whether they would, especially if you have more of a commitment from the community. I mean, I guess it would make more sense to do it in that order.
Mhm.
But they would definitely be a source, especially for filling the pool even during, anyway.
You're gonna need to fill it to
Mhm.
cure it, right? So
Yeah.
that's gonna be one immediate birth
Right,
water use,
right.
and then.
You always trust in
there's gonna
water for.
Yeah.
They probably would do that
Yeah.
anyway, because they wanted to ensure the quality of the water to
Yeah.
your whatever finish
Right.
you're doing.
Well, that all sounds great. Thank you guys.
All right.
And I'll research how Downtown Park is using that.
Yeah, we can
meter
help you
currently.
with that too, in
Okay.
terms of looking at the I was picturing, you'll see just usages that are reflective of the well is no longer productive. Now we're
Yeah.
having to supplement. That's what I was picturing the data will probably reveal.
We'll be in touch.
Okay, thanks,
Okay,
Simon.
Thank you guys.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Next, I'm going to call item 8, recommended amendment to ordinance 38, the water meter transfer policy.
Okay, this is kind of pertinent given our last discussion.
Mhm.
So, this is a little confusing, so bear with me. Um, Sorry, seems like there's a typo in the title here. It's supposed to be, if you go to the memo related to this item,
Yeah,
it should really read item 8 and 9.
okay.
So, because I really want you guys to think of these two items as kind of one big item.
Okay, so let me read it aloud. Item 9 is discussion regarding the consolidation of an existing water meter resolutions and ordinance 38 into a comprehensive new ordinance.
Yep.
So those are the two,
Okay. So the first item is basically we have this ordinance 38. This is effectively our transfer meter ordinance. Right now, it has really restrictive language around if you transfer a meter, then you need to essentially demolish the building, get rid of all of the plumbing, and I, in the context of a broader review of our like meter governance, I think it's really not appropriate for us to get into these land use questions as much as we have. I think it's appropriate for us to be instituting limits and managing effectively the moratorium, and ensuring that we're not, augmenting water use over time, and that we kind of have this crystallized time, point in time that we look back to, which is basically when the data was collected in 2017, which informs that, 2,700 cubic feet per quarter. But I think we can get away from a lot of these sort of land use kind of overreach if we really just institute limits. That's kind of my own sense of what is kind of an more appropriate approach to these types of concerns.
Limits meaning what? LWUPs?
Yeah, ellipse. So I'm gonna
That
use,
would standardize things, right? So it would.
yeah, so
limit what kind of development would fit into that standard LWAP. Right?
you mean that having 2,700 as a limit would dictate what people can build? Is that what you're saying? Yeah, I mean, we're already in that kind of standpoint already, right? I would say, which is effectively if somebody pulls a permit and comes before you guys for the lot, at least as I've stood on the board, you guys are usually instituting 2,700 cubic feet per quarter.
Or less larger use.
So you're saying like if I own a house and I'm building a new house and I transfer the meter. And you're saying let's remove the provision that you have to demolish your house and your plumbing.
Mhm.
How are you proposing that you don't do that, but you impose an LWUP on that previous meter location?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I think
Wouldn't it be 0?
the previous one would be 0, yes. And I think that, I mean, I guess when I read that language, to me, it seems like a little bit like, can't we just manage, like people in other cities that run water districts turn off water.
Yeah.
And then they ensure that a property is not served by water. They don't make somebody tear down their home. They basically say you don't have service. And we can do things like, cap the line and stuff like that. That makes it much less easy for somebody to turn back that water. But I consider that effectively, we should be capable of managing our system and ensuring that if we've said somebody is not allowed to serve that property with treated water, we are making sure it's not being served with treated water. That's, I mean, and just to point out, like right now, you could have situations where somebody's, circumventing and using water through somebody else's meter, whatever. And it's just like, we're not going to get into that,
Yeah.
So it's just like, we should be able to manage this. So what in particular, why this language seems pretty restrictive is that if somebody right now had 2 meters on adjacent properties and they merged their property, and right now what the language says is if you move that meter, you can no longer serve the adjacent property, and in fact you need to just demolish the building and remove all of the plumbing. But the point is, if you just impose 2 limits on those 2 meters, what do we care if you then move the meter and serve that adjacent property? That's kind of my point. So,
Because the LWIP would stay with the meter.
exactly. So, because it
They
should,
both get LWIPs.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
They
they both
both,
do.
in that situation, they both get LWIPs. You move the meter somewhere else, and then you're not having to institute this draconian measure that says, no, you need to get rid of all of that other infrastructure. So if you look at Ordinance 38, that portion of it is incredibly restrictive. It doesn't give you guys discretion. I mean, like, you obviously could have written in language that says, at the discretion of the board could find an exception to this and not require you to, remove all of your plumbing. But it doesn't. It just says as soon as you transfer the meter, the applicant shall remove all of its stuff. So the first proposed, so we can go to the ordinance now, and sorry, I hope it's obvious. This is basically, sorry, I can't see the highlights here, unfortunately, on my printed copy. Yeah, but I mean, as long as you can see them, that's fine. And maybe we can,
See how
Here,
it's-
why don't you look at it?
Okay.
Easier for you to speak.
sorry, thank you.
I mean,
Is that what you want
you
to see?
see with color,
Yeah.
color blind, you can still see it.
Yeah. So sorry. So all I did here, this is what I, call a very limited review or amendment, as suggested amendments to Ordinance 38. The language that it is basically exactly verbatim Ordinance 38. All I've done is to change the language around that particular section to enable the scenario that I just described to happen. So in that case, there are some loose threads. In particular, we are missing what happens when you merge properties and that institution of the LWIP that you were just talking about, right? Oh, well, obviously in that case, as soon as you merge the properties, both of them are on an LWIP, and as soon as you transfer the one, that one's going to be on an LWIP too. We don't actually have any of that language explicitly in our ordinance right now. So what this does is just effectively describes, if you merge a property in this case where there's 2 meters, then effectively you're going to have a limit on both meters. Then you could move the other meter, and then you would not trigger that language. So if you go to that section of it, sorry. And I'm just going to read the highlights of where language has changed. So you can see I've added a whereas section. Whereas the BCPUD now finds it necessary to further refine its regulations regarding water meter transfers to address circumstances arising from parcel mergers and from the sale of transferred meters prior to development, and to clarify when former site remediation requirements and water efficiency requirements may be waived without causing an increase in water demand. So that's just basically an introduction to that whole section down here. If you go down further, then you'll see another highlighted section. Parcel merger exception to former site remediation. I'm not going to read through everything here. But just suffice it to say that this, I'll just read, yeah, the one point, if the board makes the foregoing findings, meaning everything that's listed above, it may, in its sole discretion, waive some or all demolition, plumbing removals, and septic decommissioning obligations applicable to merged parcels. So basically, it describes exactly what I just said. If you guys found that an applicant was suggesting, hey, I'm going to merge 2 properties, both properties already have a meter, I'm going to transfer one of those meters to a different property, we basically say, that's fine. We don't care about any of that. We're just instituting LWEPs on both of these meters. And yeah, and so we're not removing any of that demolition language. It still exists here. So it just basically defines the situation in which the board could, at its discretion, waive the applicant's requirement to remove all of the plumbing and all of that. Okay. One other point to point out is that, and this is, I think, probably just consistent with existing status quo. So the other thing that we've not formalized in our existing resolutions or ordinances is the idea of a floating meter. Obviously, we talk about floating meters. Everybody knows what I'm talking about if I talk about a floating meter. We keep track of them in our database. It's kind of an oversight that we don't actually have any governance language that says, because it's very different than what happens in other cities, right, where there's no moratorium. The value of the meter is effectively almost like an ownership of the person. They can go into a a market and sell that meter. Like, we're all familiar with that process. So basically daylighting that is something that happens. We are not involved, but we effectively, if somebody comes in here and says, here's a note from the former owner, I now own this meter. Here's, we basically change that person's name in our account. So basically, formalizing that whole process is also important. And one thing that is also cleaned up in here is basically, if you look at the original ordinance, it says things like, and when I, let's take the example that I was just describing. The person moves their meter from, they've merged the property, we've put it LWEPs, and then they take that meter and they decide, okay, now it's floating, I want to sell it. Well, if you look at the language in here, it says you need to ensure how that next property is developed, that you put in low flush toilets, that you did all of that, right? So it doesn't make any sense, because if somebody can sell their meter, then they don't have any control over how the next person develops. So it tries to clean up that side of things too. So it's not only when you merge the properties, you no longer have to, get rid of all of the plumbing, but also it allows the board to allow an exception for this. Okay, if it goes into floating meter status and you've sold this thing, the next person is effectively beholden to that limit and ensuring low flush appliances and all of that. But
Yeah, I thought it was really good to clean that up.
okay.
And normally we don't tell people what to do after it goes through the meter. Like,
Yeah.
we don't, the county tells them they should put low flush in, and we tell them they should put irrigation in and all the things, but that's not something that we regulate.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just gonna pull, because that's a good segue to the next item, which is this ordinance 38. I would consider it like the sort of bare minimum to just sort of clean it up, to allow us to effectively improve some of the status quo of like what is actually happening, and ensure that some of the very rigid language in there doesn't make you guys so like hamstrung that you can't do things that you support, is basically what I would consider those revisions. The next item 9, well, actually just pulling back to ordinance 38 still, it's still riddled with these types of things though that you're pointing out, Grace, where it to me is way too involved in what people are doing on the other side of their meter. I feel pretty strongly that we should be concerned with overall usage, but getting into the use of how somebody's using their water on the other side of their meter is inconsistent with the way that we talk about it. Because like, to Grace's point, we say like, we're not concerned with what you're doing on the other side of the meter. Well, if that's the case, then why are we telling people to, do all of these things? And I think cleaning up the language and making clear that that is actually the purview of the county through their permitting process is more appropriate. So the next ordinance is basically trying to do many things. One is to clean up there's sort of the logistical nightmare of our limited water use permit as an example, where you have an ordinance and you've had now over many decades 8 amendments that sit on top of that ordinance. And for you to read, to understand what the rule is today, you not only have to read the original ordinance, but you have to delve into the history and then understand that, oh no, this one got rescinded. So it's basically trying to clean up a lot of that. And the first part of it is we can't totally lose sight of that history, but the first part is sort of laying out how did we get here, and you can understand sort of the history of those ordinances and resolutions. The other thing I would say that's messy, just from like that kind of very high level standpoint, is that we mix resolutions and ordinances. I think that these really all, like our limited water use permit, those are really ordinances. They shouldn't be resolutions. Resolutions, I mean, you can have them be, and I understand that the BPUD has historically done a lot of things through resolutions, but resolutions should be considered more like things that we can like, passes for a year, and then it kind of maybe is not even relevant because the years passed. As an example, our resolutions on proposition, for our budget, as an example, right? That thing essentially is irrelevant the next year when you pass a new budget. Like that's kind of the more appropriate use of a resolution in our kind of governance style. And these types of things that are effectively like, hey, this is how we manage water use, should really fall under an ordinance. So anyway, I don't, as I said, number 9, I'm bringing number 8 forward to see if you guys are receptive to amend this and adopt this language here. Number 9 is brought forward just as like, what is your kind of interest in pursuing a broader overhaul of the effectively what I'm calling water. I don't even remember what I named it, but it's
Water meter use, limited water use permits, and meter transfer ordinance.
yeah, exactly. So, title leaves a little bit
Could be a cool acronym.
so yeah, so I don't know if we want to draw back to ordinance 38 and just focus on that. I was just trying to lay out the big picture for both of these ordinances. But maybe we can kind of refine back into ordinance 38 and look at if you guys are comfortable with the language there. Or and one other logistical standpoint, just to point out that ordinances, and sorry that I'm new to this and didn't really fully appreciate this, but like an amendment or even a new ordinance really has a pretty long time frame, which is basically a first reading, a second reading, and then 30 days prior to its effective date. So you can't really get away from that even bare minimum, like almost 3 months.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, hey everybody, my name is Peter Whitzer. Grace and Jack know me. I grew up here. So for those of you that don't know me, I grew up here. I worked at the school with Grace, and I own Western Physical Therapy and Green Bay Station. So very much a local. And part of this came up because this is potentially going to affect me in this instance of merging lots and having 2 water meters, which obviously I don't need 2 water meters. So
Did you get Simon's number?
yeah, we might have a buyer for you. So I also want to say, like, I understand that the BPUD and the ordinance 38 and the moratorium is about the fact that we live with a watershed, and I've grown up being very careful with water, so I understand that really the issue is about water, which I think is primarily what George is pointing out. So just to say that that's me, that's my potential situation. And my understanding is across the state that laws and different, which, obviously Bolinas, but across the state, they're trying to allow housing and allow units on properties because people need housing. And obviously I would more than happily accept the limited use permits. Wouldn't even be an issue for me because we use so little water. And, you know, I'm not trying to do anything shady.
That's a really nice way to put it.
So,
Yeah, that's
Nothing negative.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's partly how this one came up, is because I came here asking questions.
Okay,
thanks.
thank you for introducing yourself.
So let me throw a little historical perspective on this, because I think some circumstances have substantially changed. I don't know if you'll notice, but in the early language of ordinance 38, it points out that it was initially passed in 1976.
No, it's good.
So
I can do
at
it. by-
that time,
Yeah.
things were different than they are now in terms of people having any limits on their water. For one thing, there was no such thing as a limited water use permit. There was an expanded water use permit, which put a cap on projects where people got permits from the county and came to the BPUD, and then in order to get your county permit, you had to accept a cap on the water that you could use. But I would say that in 1976, most of the town did not apply for permits and were adding to their properties all the time and continued to use as much water as they wanted because they had no limit. So at this point, we have gone in a different direction, we the BPUD, and are now basically trying to get everybody's water limited in how much you can use, which would of course apply in a situation like this because we would write it in there. So that's one major difference in my mind between when ordinance 38 got passed and now. Also, over the years, there have been people who essentially cheated by merging parcels, freeing up a water meter from one of the parcels and then selling it or transferring it somewhere else. And then when no one was looking, ran a hose over to the other property that they were supposed to dismantle, but they didn't. People were living in it and using it. And one of the reasons the BPUD, I think, imposed the condition of dismantling and removing the structure was to avoid, two households running off of one unrestricted water meter.
Mhm.
I don't know that that would be a situation anymore. So it seems like if we had two parcels that each had a water meter and there was a limit on the amount of water that went through one of them,
Mhm.
and if that limit was going to apply to the merged parcel, even though it was now
Mhm.
serving two houses, from a water use point of view, it wouldn't matter to us, even though that meter was serving two houses
Yeah.
rather than one. Do we all agree with that? I mean, I don't think so.
It's the water that I care about. You
Well,
know,
in other words, you
think
now
how
have
much
two
water-
houses using one meter, but they're still using no more than the allotted amount of water, even though it's serving more people
Yeah.
in more structures.
Yeah, and sorry because I forgot that. I forgot that I included a whole memo that looks at whether because when I just some context here, when I first joined here and Belle and Jennifer were telling about limited water use permits, and mind you, I'd grown up here, but I never found the opportunity to learn like the deep, I kind of understood that this was a thing, but I wasn't really immersed in it and didn't really fully understand like limited water use permits or anything like that. But almost immediately I was like, why would a merger not trigger an LWIP? It seems like a huge oversight. And I know I've talked to you guys about this before, but effectively, I mean, this is sort of obviously a ridiculous situation, but imagine you have a property within our district that is, essentially a farm without water. And then you have a house that's served by a meter. And in that case, and let's say there's a neighbor who's, redoing their kitchen. And in the one case, that triggers the development permit. They come before us and you guys consider the use of, the addition of a bedroom, and you're like pretty straightforwardly, that's gonna cause a limit to be in place. Whereas the other person merges to the farm, starts irrigating the entire farm, and that doesn't institute an LWIP, right? So I think there's this glaring thing of mergers don't trigger LWIPs. So one of the things I did was just effectively read our ordinance 30, not 38, our LWIP ordinance. And that's not an ordinance, sorry, resolution. And that one is the one where it's all of these. So if you look at the totality of that resolution as it stands today with all of its amendments, I think you can make a pretty compelling argument that actually you can, you, the board today, can review mergers and institute LWUPs associated with that. And that's because there's like a particular phrase in there that essentially says when people go before that, you know, it lays out sort of the rationale. You, the board, are concerned with ensuring that people don't undertake changes at their properties that could expand water use. And so when somebody, you know, pulls a use permit or a development permit, we can look at the exact language. You will in that case review for the institution of a limited water use permit. Effectively, it doesn't say that's only the condition in which you can do it. And it's very much within the nature of like the sentiment of behind that, and it gives you a lot of discretion as the board to consider, hey, is this property use going to expand water use at this property? So anyways, I laid that out in a memo, and you guys, I mean, I would say we don't have to do this tonight, but I'd look at that and just consider whether you think that is actually a reasonable reading of our existing limited water use permit. Because the other thing is just to point out that effectively what we're describing there in terms of the merger and all of that, because a merger doesn't institute an LWUP, you know, that effectively is a little bit of a hole in that whole scenario that I was describing, because we need, you know, you essentially want it to be, okay, you merge a property. So let's take another example where effectively it's much simpler than that, right? You basically have a single meter, like the farm example. They merge their property. We scan through, like those are things that are easy for us to identify as a staff. Hey, property is being merged. And in fact, we need to like update our, as part of our like, you know, tax review and stuff like that, we need to actually account for mergers and stuff like that. But effectively, when somebody is submitting for a merger, that could come before you just as building permits or whatever comes before you. So I would say, like, ideally, we would clean that up and you wouldn't have to be like, oh, it doesn't say the word only here, right? But I think there's an interpretation of the existing language that enables you guys to do that currently. And then obviously when we do this, if you guys are receptive to the idea of doing a big overhaul and cleaning all of this meter transfer LWUP ordinance language up, we would just make it clear, you know, merger triggers an LWUP, you know, building, I mean, and not necessarily, but triggers review of, you know, the need to come submit for the LWUP.
But that's gonna be on the planning side of things, not on the building permit. So when a
Yeah.
lot is merged, it's going to planning, and I would think
Yeah.
that's what's coming.
Yeah, and I
next,
think
right? And I think that should trigger an LWUP if there is one water. I'm not comfortable if there are two water meters that they're both tied to the LWUP and one is gonna be sold off. Now restricted to an LWUP based on that use. I don't know why, but I'm just not comfortable with that. I'd rather them be able to sell, and I also don't know how if we do it, I think it's the market values what that water, because it's always been unlimited as far as I know. No, has anybody ever sold a permit with an LWUP?
I'm not sure.
I can't think.
Well,
of-
if they applied for a
Possibly.
building permit.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, to me, it's a little bit moot because as soon as, I mean, that meter's only valuable because you're going to be able to develop something someday, right? And as soon as they go in for their development permits, you're going to
But
trigger the
they're
LWUP.
buying water, a meter with an LWUP that's limited to a prior site that might not be relevant to
Mhm.
the site that, so that part I'm uncomfortable with.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, I feel like we're leaving money on the table. I don't, is there money that is coming to BPUD in these floating meters?
So it depends. I mean, that's also, I mean, the mega ordinance gets into all of this because actually, if you look at what we do currently, it depends on the nature of the meter, but most people continue to pay their annual service fee because effectively, if they didn't, then when they sell that meter, they would have to pay all of the backlog of all those annual service fees plus potentially interest.
I think we should be adding a 10% of the sale of whatever the water meter is. Comes back to the.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that is more appropriate is for us to have service fees with floating meters and dealing with all of this, right? Because obviously there's administration of transferring meters, and it's not like people don't get to just do this out in like, you know, a silo without interacting with us. And so I would say cleaning up like that, you know, if you look at that mega ordinance, it's kind of like getting into all of these things. If you know, if you put a meter into floating status, then there's a fee associated with that application, which is basically us processing all of that, you know. If you bring it out of floating status, you know, if you transfer a meter, it's basically fees associated with, hey, you're asking us to do 2 hours worth of work. We legally cannot just do that.
Yeah, but I'm not even thinking about hourly. I'm thinking, how do we build up the funds that we need for servicing our entire, you know, systems or upgrading or
Mhm.
so I'm looking for money that I think we're leaving on the table, and I would want to explore adding a straight 10%, whatever they sell their water meter at.
I don't know if we can do that.
Well, yeah, but it'd be, that's a that's a let's find out question, it seems like to me. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, we don't know,
Okay.
so let's,
Yeah.
it's.
You know, it'd be interesting to get feedback on this from Vic Amoroso, because
Mhm.
I sat on this board for many
Yeah.
years with him, as did
Mhm.
you, and periodically the subject would come up, and he would always be opposed to this whole concept, because, well, then, look at me, he says, I got the Grand Hotel, and that's got a meter, and I have a house in the back, and that's got a meter, and we hardly use any, and why don't I just merge those two properties and use one meter for both of them, and then I'll sell the other one? And then he would say, but I can't because of ordinance, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, but he would be favored by this, right? Because in this case, we would say just put a limit on both of them and sell it.
And I think if we're entertaining a discussion to change ordinance 38 to allow this to happen, it would be good to send him. Or just give him some little notice that we're thinking of doing this, because we've had this discussion for a long time, and I'm interested to get his.
Yeah, there's a
feedback
couple
on
of
it.
those. So there's a couple where people have not been paying their annual service charge, but they were basically a documented meter at the time that the moratorium was instituted, and we tracked them. Like what we're doing that for, I'm not sure, because it's like basically ordinance 38 is so restrictive, it doesn't allow you to ever remove that unless you're willing to destroy your building, right?
Right.
But I think that this brings up, you know, what if, you know, again, just to reiterate, I think we should be concerned with essentially water use and making sure that the summed water use, as we see, is like responsibly managed, which basically, like I said, was calculated effectively in 2017. That's what our concern is with. And we institute limits, but we don't do much beyond that. So I think, yeah, anyway, so I mean, there's a lot we could get into here. Again, I was just bringing some of these ideas forward just for the purpose of discussion. So I'd say there's two kind of paths that I see here.
Yeah.
One is you guys, and like I said, it takes a while for these ordinance to take effect anyway. So we've got kind of a baked in like delay. But one is to read the memo that describes why I think you guys can institute LWUPs off of mergers currently. And then the other is to look at the language associated with ordinance 38 on all the yellow highlights to introduce all of that. And then basically, we can come back next month. I would say is probably more appropriate to do a first reading associated with that and whether you guys want to implement those changes. And then the other idea is look closely, or not closely, but you can just kind of read that mega ordinance that I've started to develop and just see whether you generally like the idea of moving towards that. So we could do effectively two things in parallel, which is kind of band-aid up ordinance 38. And then, you know, in probably by the summer, that would enable somebody to merge properties, move a meter, all of that stuff would be cleaned up. Ultimately, my hope would be that all of that kind of temporary band-aiding is kind of moot because we're in parallel working on a broader overhaul that tries to clean up the language and sort of comprehensively deal with cleaning up the LWUP and the or the transfers and better transparency around some of these terms like floating meters and how we handle all of that and transferring meters, etc.
Yeah, so I'm very much in favor of moving both of these forward. I think the mega, the one big beautiful ordinance
No.
is a great idea. I think it's confusing for our customers, it's confusing for the board, you know, when you've got this kind of barnacle effect.
Mhm.
And I also like the idea of doing the patch
Mhm.
while we're working on that, because I think that's gonna be a longer term process. And I'm just trying to understand the timeline. If we were gonna do patch, what is it, 8? Item 8, it would be first reading in April, second reading in May.
Mhm.
And is that a vote then in May?
That's an adoption in May.
Okay, reading, adoption in May.
And then
30
the
days,
effective
and then
date.
it goes
Mhm.
effective in the middle of June.
Yep.
Okay, I'm just trying to get the time
Yep.
in my head.
Yeah, that would be what it would look like.
I think that we should do that.
Yeah, go down those.
Yeah,
paths.
and I just think we're not ready to do the detailed reading. So if you guys can look, you know, plan then for April's reading. Yeah, yeah. So in April, that can be our first reading where you guys are saying like, oh, okay, I'd prefer to have, you know, this word there or whatever.
Would it be helpful if we sent, I mean, I could just.
Yeah, you guys can
because
send me whatever comments. I can come prepared with those revisions. But basically, I wouldn't suggest that we try to do that right now.
No, go around item 2.
No. Yeah, well, let's do that and then agendize it. You
Yeah.
know, worst
And-
case scenarios, we can't seem to all agree on enough language that we can agree to, and you just have to kick it over another month, but we
Yeah.
can at least set it up to read it next meeting.
And then one other thing just to point out, I mean, I already said this, but the patch also involves an interpretation of mergers. So look at that memo and, you know, look at the LWUP and decide whether you think I'm full of baloney or if you think like, actually, no, we don't need to revise the LWUP. The reason I would have otherwise done a small amendment to the LWUP, but just speaking to what a mess that thing is, it's like I was gonna have to do an amendment on an amendment. It was just like, and I'm like, okay, this isn't total overhaul of the LWUP. It's really quite a big amount of work. And so it just speaks to kind of the nature of that resolution right now is very, very messy and hard to amend.
Good,
All right.
thank you for
Are
bringing
there
all
any-
this
I
up.
think someone has a hand up also, but real quick, are there any projects that are in the queue, like our guests? Is anybody waiting for a decision based on this patch or?
No, I would say what is probably more pertinent is like we've seen people merging, right? And so I'd say having some decision from the board around that is probably more pressing. I mean, obviously, I'd like to not, you know, to have this. I think it's reasonable for us to have this in place by June, the middle of June, though.
So you see them merging and just sitting, floating, having a floater.
No, sorry, not related. I'm talking about how mergers right now don't trigger LWIPs.
Okay.
Yeah, so right now, if you have 2 parcels, each with an unlimited water use, for unrestricted, and you merge, those stay unlimited.
Right.
Mhm. Yep.
But if this happens, then they both become subject to our LWOP.
Yeah,
Yep, potentially, yeah. And I mean, that would be the idea behind it.
yeah.
It would trigger a review. That's what it would really do. I mean, and so sorry, just to point out why one more time, what I think is particularly irrational right now is we have language that says and this is now possible, I don't know why, but you can merge properties across a road, okay?
Yep.
And we have an ordinance that, within Ordinance 38, I think, is like you can't use, and this was back to Jack's point at baiting, you can't take a hose, bring it over to the other property that is not merged with the site with the meter and start irrigating that next, the property across the street.
Yeah.
But if you merge them, then that's fine. But that is completely counter to the whole idea of an expanded water use permit. The idea was hey, is somebody expanding the use? Well, yes, they're expanding the use. They just plan to start irrigating, a 3-acre lot or whatever. And basically that's not triggering the review.
Yeah.
But like I said, if somebody then on that same, scenario was like doing some like kitchen remodel, that would have to come before the board for like extensive review. So it just feels like it's very much in line with the existing ordinance. It's just not been our practice yet to review mergers.
Okay. Is that Bruce? Is that you that has your hand up?
It's just the cursor.
Or is it? Oh,
Is that true? A kitchen remodel would trigger?
It would not trigger a limit, but it would trigger a review.
Yeah.
So that's what my point is. It would come before the board and you guys at your discretion could say, you know what, this kitchen remodel is not going to cause. But my point is that the merger doesn't even come before the board.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just think it should be planning triggered items that should become before the board.
Yeah.
Not just building permits. Right?
Yeah, and so the language
Planning
right now
would be
says
included.
land use and building. So I think the land use may actually be planning and it may be mergers, or that's kind of the way
Yeah.
to interpret that, to
Yeah.
say like, hey, our existing language allows you guys to review mergers. We've just not been doing it.
Yeah, and really to comply with the moratorium, we
Yeah.
should be doing it.
Yes.
I mean, we're
Yeah.
trying
So
to,
are you looking for direction from the board saying next time you see a merger come across your desktop, would you bring it before us so we can?
Yeah, I can start. I mean,
But we have to actively seek that out. That's not the county coming to us and saying.
we
"Hey,
can talk to the
somebody's-"
county and ask them,
I
because
think we
basically
should be.
we right now Bell reviews the building permits.
Yeah.
But it's an active process it's a proactive process by us where we go and review. It's very easy for us to essentially have channels with the county and just say, hey, anytime you see XYZ, send us an email. And they sometimes do, like depending on the nature of the project, right? They'll be like, hey, do you serve water to this property? Because we're wondering about this, but it's more haphazard than that.
all right.
Well,
Well,
sorry, yeah. I think it should be, even beyond whether we service water to that property, if we're within the Bolinas jurisdiction and somebody is going to, for a planning submittal,
Mhm.
that should be coming across our
Okay.
review.
Yeah.
Good.
I still think that's money at the table that we.
tap it, but we'll talk about that.
Okay,
Yeah.
All right,
we'll
where,
battle that out next.
Okay,
Yeah.
so this will come back before you in
Yes.
April for review.
yeah. And there you go, Preet.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank
Alright.
you.
Thanks for being here. Turn some lights on.
Maybe if you just turn this light on there.
Is everybody hot?
Yes.
That's too bright.
No, that's fine. Okay.
We could trade places, because I just put my jacket on.
no, I'm cold,
Oh, okay, yeah, okay.
All right, I'm gonna continue, then we're back up to item 2. Now, rather than read the whole thing, I would just say this was an item about using a certain kind of herbicide, which is low toxicity, as an exception to a general application not to use them for cutting eucalyptus stumps, which are otherwise a very difficult task. And this is similar to an issue that we had has it been 10, 15 years by now?
Long time.
In which the vector control district up from Sonoma wanted to start using different kinds of chemicals to control mosquitoes, basically, and were spraying them in ponds, and there became a real concern over toxic chemicals being put into the water and the soil. And Grace joined a committee of people from Bolinas and Point Reyes.
Yeah, it was all West Marin.
And to oppose them using some of the stronger elements and what the guy called his toolbox.
It was more that we wanted to have eyes on what was being used and what turned, eventually we got a good rapport with the vector control district, who were doing a really great job, honestly. And they were using, they were being extremely thoughtful with what they were using. I mean, overall, they
Yeah.
were doing a great job, and they got to know that people in these communities were very interested in keeping that, you know, just being having a very high level of caution with what's going into the.
George, are you
Did a good
familiar
job.
with the fact that went on?
Mhm,
So
yeah.
there must be something in our file somewhere that talked about which chemicals we thought were permissible and which ones were not, or is that?
It was very specific to vector control.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, the resolution that we're calling to is much more general in nature and says like it wherever possible, use non-chemical or alternatives or the least,
Yeah.
toxic.
So do you
So-
have an opinion on this proposal for this particular chemical?
I mean, not an informed opinion. I would just say that this is basically MWPA. It's their protocol because of the fact that they don't want to invest in work and then have to basically put a nightmare. I mean, and I'm appreciative because obviously we'd be the ones managing the resprouting, right? And this is basically conventional protocol, as I understand it, for all MWPA eucalyptus work, all Caltrans eucalyptus work. It's essentially the conventional protocol. So as far as the toxicity, obviously it's a factor of how toxic the compound actually is, both to the environment and humans, but also the degree to which it's contained. And so the containment aspect of it, just to describe, is basically, and this is also because of the effect, like how the activity of the compound. You have to apply it as soon as you cut the tree and you paint it on to the stump. So it's very contained. It's not like sprayed on or whatever. And it's important. And that, aligns both in terms of how like promoting the effectiveness of the toxin to the specific tree, but also in terms of containment of the compound. My understanding is that it has a very short half-life, so it is active for a very short period of time, and after which it degrades to even less toxic compounds. But again, I'm just spewing information that somebody's delivered to me. I didn't go and do like an exhaustive research on this. But I think I would encourage you guys to look into the materials further. There are, with the memo that's provided from MWPA, it's not only the memo that substantiates, the reasoning behind it and that this is an appropriate use, appropriate approach. And a warranted approach, but also it has references to like the primary literature backing up all their statements. So whether it's the board or members of the public that have concerns, all of that information is there.
Well, let me just hold the board briefly. What do you think about pursuing that, Kevin?
Yeah, it wouldn't be my first choice, but I trust the science, and I guess I would be curious, what sort of cost savings are we talking about as far as staff time? If we're talking about 100 trees coming down, staff time to maintain the trimming of the shoots each year. I mean, I know then that multiplies each year, right? We're hoping to do this again next year and the year after, continuing to cut down more trees.
Yeah.
So I just don't have a sense of the sort of ballpark that we're talking about here. I
Yeah.
assume it's substantial, so I'm willing to go along with it because I assume that we're talking about a substantial amount of work for staff. So, but I don't know that for a fact.
I mean, I don't know it for a fact. I haven't like modeled it out or anything in terms of man hours. I would just like point people to Out Mesa Road where this wasn't applied and there's, thousands of shoots. So it's not for whatever reason when you cut down eucalyptus, it's like basically this ring of all of these shoots that expand from there. I don't think that we were ever really debating not doing something like the alternative here in terms of our future management was effectively stump grinding, but there were a few reasons to not pursue that in terms of just overall degradation of adjacent trees, and also the upfront costs of stump grinding are really expensive. So yeah.
Keep going, and what do you think?
Yeah, I don't really have anything more to say other than that Kevin was voice.
What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, I kind of similar. I've always heard that if you like cut the shoots for the first 3 years, then they don't really come back. So I don't know like what the cost of that would be. The chemical seems like a very unbelievable thing to do.
Yeah, also how I know when it came up with the insecticides.
Yeah, but it seems like there is a lot of kind of study and like a confirmation that it has a short half-life and it doesn't saturate the soil, and maybe if it's done at the right time of year, it won't like wash down into a waterway or something. So yeah, I mean, I tend to like trust the science as well.
Okay, and what do you think, Grace?
Yeah, I'm in favor of it. I read pretty carefully the report from the scientist about the half-life and just the various ways that it might spread, and it seems like the best alternative to me.
Yeah, that's what I thought
In the
too.
circuit, it's the lesser of the evils, I would say.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
Okay.
I'm not too worried about the substance itself, and if it's applied as described, and if it degrades as described, then I think that's an acceptable.
yeah. Well, I know, having lived in Bolinas for a long time and watching a lot of eucalyptus trees get cut down, they absolutely come back.
Yeah.
Stronger than
That's the
ever.
last thing.
And now there's 5 trees where there was
Mhm.
one.
Yeah,
So
we want to avoid that.
there's real.
Yeah, no,
So I think we should.
Yeah, I mean, just to
pursue it.
provide some context here, I mean, I know obviously I was, when they described their conventional protocol, they're insistent that they do it this way. I don't know what would happen if we said, oh, we're not allowing this. Whether they would be willing to, if that would be like a no-go for them. I was like, can you please provide all of the materials? And they're obviously used to this. Obviously, that it's not like Bolinas is a bastion of, environmentalism and concern for human health. Obviously, anywhere that they work in Marin, this is a concern. They're used to providing, the backup. I mean, I guess the other thing I would say is it's kind of consistent. Obviously, biology is complicated, but the fact that you need to apply it in a very specific way within a very short period of time is also reflective of it breaking down very quickly, right? And not being a very potent compound usually is a good thing in terms of impact on health and biology, right? So it's like if you don't apply it within minutes, it's basically not effective.
So from your science background, you think this is a?
I mean, again, I don't want to pretend that I spent 100 hours looking into Garland 4 Ultra, because I didn't. I was relying on MWPA as the experts. And also, that's broader than MWPA. That's also Caltrans and Cal State Parks. Like, this is really how those folks that are dealing with eucalyptus and removals, they adopt this protocol.
Okay, so,
Had a couple more thoughts, Jack?
yeah, sure.
We may want to post some signs up. I'm thinking for like walkers and pets and things like that, or does NWPA do that as part of
Well, so you probably saw that portion of it. We need to hand deliver messages to people But that's a good point. I mean, I think, to be honest, like we'll be shutting down the area in terms of people won't be moving in there for other
Right.
good reasons. But I think I can ask them about more public signage around the use of the chemical.
Okay. And then
It's in Spanish too. please.
Okay.
Sorry.
that's good. Also wondering how Beth feels about it. If I don't remember what their plan was for getting rid of the stumps. But
Yes.
was wondering if they had any input on it or if you've heard from them.
Unfortunately, we sent the link to these particular materials.
Okay.
Bell was out on Monday or last Friday. I think it was Monday.
No, I think it was yesterday. I just sent them an email and said, it pointed out that we were going to be discussing this at the meeting, and here was the items on our website, and please take a look and, come to the meeting if they're interested. I didn't hear back.
But we didn't hear anything back.
Okay.
So that's not really, yeah.
My guess is that there'll be a certain percentage of the Bolinas population that will push back on this proposal.
Okay.
With the pure opposition to any kind of chemical being put on
Yeah.
anything, so. But I don't think that should prevent us from doing what we think is right,
Yeah.
especially if most of the community supports it. Just my experience there,
Mm-hmm.
20% of the people will be opposed.
Yeah.
So,
If they show up.
yeah, well, it's just, that seems to be the way it is, but that's all right. Okay, so,
Yeah, so
Versus-
this would be approve a one-time we get request of the board.
yeah,
Oh, sorry, I haven't even talked about this. Receive update on MWPA hazardous tree removal work scheduled to begin April 27th. So just to let you know, that work is slated to begin April 27th. I believe I included a scope of work there. It's pretty broad, but you can get a sense of, the overall cost and the tree removals. What else did I want to tell you in terms of I think that was it.
so you need a motion from us to approve, as you say, a one-time exception to resolution 538. You looking for a vote on that?
Yes, please.
All right. So can I get a motion then for a one-time exception to resolution 538 to allow the use of this chemical for the eucalyptus stumps?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Okay, there you go.
Thank you.
Item 3, volunteer downtown parking committee update request of BPUD board of directors letter of support. Bruce, is that you here on that?
Only me.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
He's-
so
Yeah,
this is a volunteer committee. We're not an official committee. We meet quarterly. It includes the original members, which would be Bruce Bowser, who's here, Al Minville, Chuck McFarlane, and Sherry Hirsch, and this time we had Layla Monroe attend. So I sent an email, which I believe is in your binder, which is really focusing, we're meeting quarterly, but the critical path right now, building on the success that this committee has done over the years, is looking at Brighton. And I'll just read it really quickly. Brighton parking of unhoused folks camping out, living in and or around their vehicles, and or folks, including neighbors, using parking as a means of storage continues to be a major issue for many. Brighton homeowners, tenants, visitors, and residents with access to parking, downtown businesses being impacted by lack of available parking, ongoing sanitary trash cleanup required, etc. So the major issue here seems to be a lack of enforcement by the sheriff's department. The committee agreed that Chuck would draft a letter to share with the board with a request to send, as signed by BPUD, to the enforcement officer, with a CC to Rodoni, because he's been very active and communicating, particularly with Sherry. And so we have a draft of that letter, but I think I've received a couple of emails from Chuck and over the last couple of days, so including an hour before this board meeting, which I haven't been able to review. But Bruce, my understanding is the request now of the committee is really to ask the sheriff to come and attend one of our BPUD meetings to be able to answer some questions around how they are enforcing parking on Brighton.
Yeah, in essence, we'd like to have him appear at a BPUD meeting, but in fact, I doubt that he's going to make the drive from wherever he lives to Bolinas. So I suspect he'll attend by Zoom. We should extend that invitation. Our hope is to get a list of questions for him that will more or less have him commit to what they're going to be doing in order to see to the any sort of people parking overnight, et cetera, et cetera. Just are they enforcing it, and how are they enforcing it, and how often, et cetera. We just like to have some more feedback. We've reached out to him on several occasions while we were still a standing committee, and he just wasn't very forthcoming with answers to our questions and or opportunities to meet, etc. So we thought, let's get BPUD involved, and
Okay.
yeah.
I think that's a good idea. What do you think about that, Georgia? Invite somebody from the sheriff's department to, they could attend by Zoom. That's probably how they would do it.
I would leave that to the board to decide. I think that's probably a board level decision.
Okay, well, let's go around. What do you think, Kevin?
Sure, I think, Bell in particular has invested a lot of time, BPUD staff in getting this program going, so I think it's reasonable to ask for some accounting of the enforcement.
For enforcement, and what do you think, Andrew?
I thought this was about getting a letter of general support. That was the agenda item.
Well, now it's changed now to an appearance by it's an invitation to the sheriff or a representative, so I'm wondering whether I think Georgia would like to know whether the board is actually supportive of it or not, so I'm just taking a poll of the board.
I'm supportive of it, I guess. I think I'm just really sensitive of what we're enforcing here, because there's a lot of things on the content, and I think we kind of agreed to do the parking, and there's like street vendors and trash pickup and everything on this letter, and I'm just concerned that we're a little bit out of our.
Well, I think the
Our plan.
trash pickup as a result of unhoused folks, I'm sorry, I want to make sure I'm using the terminology
Sure.
correctly, that are putting their trash and debris on properties, that they're parking next to. So it's not that we're looking for a trash cleanup, that seems to be happening.
It's a symptom.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the only other thing I would want to be sensitive, even if it's just really focused on parking, is I think we, at the outset, obviously I wasn't here when this all began, but my understanding is that we were really administering the program itself, but we would make like a pretty clear delineation that we're not involved in the enforcement.
That's
Yeah,
right.
that's
Right?
what
And so that's I mean, and not to say that you guys are asking us to go enforce it. I understand that that's
No,
not really what's going on here.
Whether we're inviting the sheriff.
Yeah, but I think that that's actually getting close to BCPUD is involved in the lack of enforcement, right? So that's just to be, careful about what effectively BPUD committed to, because we, to be honest, don't bring enough money in to really support all of the administrative work that we do related to this program.
Right.
And I just want to make, I don't want to put a bunch of work on Bell to having to interact with the sheriff around ensuring that the enforcement is happening.
I don't think that's what this
Okay.
committee has been saying. I mean, what I can see, or I can tell you from Wharf Road, the neighbors have been very active when they see somebody who is staying in their camper van exceeds 22 feet longer than the 72 hours. People are calling, and the sheriff is very responsive.
Okay.
What I'm hearing on Brighton is people are calling and there's no enforcement by the sheriff. And so I think the Brighton neighborhood is exhausted, and so they are asking BPUD if we could help by inviting the sheriff round to say, we're concerned, we're hearing from our community on many reasons that this is impacting, and we are inviting you to the table to talk about the enforcement. I don't think it's asking BPUD to actually enforce.
Let me finish with Grace. What do you think, Grace?
Well, I just want to.
I'll say, yeah, sure.
So our role is to host a meeting.
Yeah, that's the issue that I get is Georgia gonna invite the sheriff to come and, or at least by Zoom, to answer our questions. I think mostly, what is your plan for enforcement and how are you gonna do it and how do we make sure it gets done? Something along that line.
Especially going into the busy summer season.
Yeah, right, around the edge. So,
Yeah.
Yep,
What,
it started already.
yeah,
Yeah,
how do,
let me hear what Grace has to say.
how do we provide them with what they need to make that enforcement happen? If there's, if it's working on Wharf but not on Brighton, that's confusing to me and interesting, I think this is in line with what BPUD's done for a long time. I know that there's some maybe move away from that to get more kind of in our, water
Yeah,
sewer
yeah.
realm, but we've been involved with this project forever. There is nobody else. If they're not listening to residents of our town and we're the elected board, I think that it's appropriate for us to host a meeting. I don't think that's wandering too far down a street that we can't wander back.
Yeah.
I think it's
Yeah.
worth a try.
And we did form that committee and we, kind of helped shepherd it along for years and
And
years.
they've worked
Just for
So hard.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think we're in it to the extent that we have more than a passing interest in seeing the law enforcement.
Yeah.
And so I think you have the support of the board in making that invitation.
Okay.
And we'll get them.
Great. Very good.
Is any other discussion on this issue?
Well, I mean, I think the other item was a CSO position, which is a community service officer, but what I'm hearing is that may be outside the realm of what BPUD is comfortable in, I don't know, initiating or supporting, but it was an item that came up from the committee that they are interested in somebody pursuing. I don't know who that is, and the funding for that position. And I think that, Bruce, can you talk very briefly what that looks like? That's somebody who's going to help.
The community service officer is an idea that is, and exists in some smaller communities on the coast. Basically, it's an individual who goes around and, as Jack knows, we at one point had an idea about our own Bolinas parking citation, and it wasn't a citation, but just a funny notice about, you're messing with other people's space here. Can you please park better, what have you? So a community service officer, I envision somebody in a rechargeable golf cart who goes around. Maybe he's got a gumball on top, maybe not. But, he's got charging cables and he can give people a jump, and maybe the sheriff's deputies could teach him how to use a Slim Jim and open car doors. That kind of stuff goes on all day long here on weekends, believe me. And it takes hours for somebody from AAA to get out here. That could be a way to garner some money from that operation. But we need our own thing. When I live right on Brighton. I see when the sheriff comes by. We're lucky if they come by late afternoon on a weekend. By that time, half of the Miss Daughters have already gone. But they're late in the afternoon, and there's nobody else the whole rest of the day to sort of say, can you tidy up? Please don't double park. The double parking is insane. It's a madhouse down here. So
Yeah.
I just, somebody who could go around with a level head and try and talk to people, pass out information, direct them to where the restrooms are so they're not, yeah, on and on. on and off.
We thought we should have a town constable, something like
Yeah,
that.
well, that's essentially it, but,
All right, well, let's put that on our agenda then for the next meeting, and hopefully someone will come with authority to speak for the sheriff, and we'll have a game plan for them to carry out enforcement.
yeah, it's an idea that we floated with one of the previous lieutenants, and they had plenty of reasons why that couldn't be done, but we
Yeah.
know it has been done elsewhere. So
Gotta be.
let's just work at it from that angle.
Yeah,
And I will forward what Chuck sent this afternoon, is kind of the latest greatest for language, you know, if that helps to reach out to the
Okay.
sheriff.
Yeah, thank you.
okay. All right, moving on the agenda, there's nothing under item 4.
Thanks all.
Again, thank you.
Thanks, Bruce.
Night.
Item 5, approval of renewal of a lease agreement between the BPUD and Lee Dodd, who was Canoa, and Melissa Wood. This has to do with the goats on our property. I assume.
Yeah, it's just a renewal. You may remember that Mickey's lease came before you a month ago or something. This is almost exactly the same provision of us not having to collect $100 every year, instead paying it all in one full swoop, which they were very supportive of. And also some language around being able to have a sheep
Oh, thank you.
there. Is that a sheep?
Sure.
Yeah. Feels like that's plural somehow.
Do you need a motion to approve?
Yeah, if you guys can just,
Okay, can I get a motion to approve the renewal of the lease with these revisions that Laura just told us about? Thank you. Is there a second?
I will stop it.
All in favor?
I
Aye.
I do too.
Item 6, resolution 2026-2, authorizing the BPUD to enter into lease PRC 64859 with the California State Lands Commission for the continued use and maintenance of the groin. BPUD has
yeah,
been in
so
charge of the groin for years.
yes. So as you may have appreciated from the memo, basically what happened was on Monday, I got their lease, draft lease that would, essentially was drafted by the State Lands Commission. To remind you, we do this every 20 years. So not surprisingly, in the last 20 years, things have gotten more complicated. So, I was hoping that I would just bring that draft lease before you. It would be very similar to 20 years ago, and you guys could then essentially direct me to enter into the lease. That would go before the State Lands Commission in April at their meeting. We were slated to be on that meeting, and then they could effectively approve the lease from their end, and then both parties could execute it. Unfortunately, what I got on Monday, as I said, was much more complicated than it was 20 years ago. Just a few, basically the memo highlights the major differences. I'd say a prominent one is that we now have to hold $1 million worth of liability insurance, both for property and for general liability. We don't currently have that on our property schedule. We reached out to JPIA, which is our insurer, which, to be clear, is an insurer of water districts. I do not even know if they were receptive to adding this to our property schedule. Obviously, this doesn't have to do anything with the provision of water. So that's also a total unknown. And then I'd say the other thing is we need to bring this forward to council. I don't know what our out is. What does it look like if we don't pursue this? We obviously have an existing lease that has lapsed, and they never brought it forward oh, you are in, default on your lease or whatever, however that would look. So I don't know what this will look like if there's basically major barriers and we are being told by council, do not enter into this lease. What is then the alternative?
The option, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We could negotiate and say, we we don't wanna, we can't afford, we don't want to carry $1 million of liability insurance for this piece of degrading infrastructure. The maintenance costs are, more than we can bear, basically. So, maybe we could negotiate that part of it away.
I don't know. And that's the other thing is that we're not, we're not negotiating with like, our like Inverness PUD, right? We're negotiating with the State Lands Commission,
Yeah.
which, to be clear, part of the reason that this process has changed so much is that immediately I knew it was not going to be, because I could see the history of how Jennifer renewed the lease, in 2005, and the types of back and forth emails that she had with people immediately when I was essentially undertaking the same process. It was like, well, where is your original coastal development permit? Let us see what the Coastal Commission says this time around. So the Coastal Commission is just way more involved than they were back then. And they, as one of the other huge changes, is basically an analysis of alternatives that we will have to go through every time we would renew this lease, which is effectively a large environmental review to see if, essentially we could achieve the same feat through some sort of natural mechanism or structure or whatever. So I don't mean to be like so pessimistic, but I was already very concerned that we collect $5,000 a year from our general water customers, and we squirrel that money away with the idea that we were gonna use that money, which now sits like a little under $200,000, to effectively have an engineer assess the structure and then develop a plan to repair it. What we are now talking about is basically legal review, chewing up all of that money, because I think it's really appropriate that the money that we are using to investigate all of this come from that beach groin fund. Okay. And I don't know to what extent we've done that before. I don't think we've had a lot of overhead associated with it. But in as much as we will have to do a legal review, if we had to do any environmental review, if we have any, increased insurance costs associated with this, that basically means
all the agencies.
yeah, and then it's basically that eats away at the money, and then we don't even have the money to repair it, and effectively the lease is getting, essentially signing off that we are responsible for the repair and maintenance of the structure. So it doesn't look super promising to me in terms of where is this funding coming from. I do think it's a little weird because it's a county beach. It is serving a much broader, sector of the population than our water customers. It is effectively, like, I just think that it may be appropriate to bring in the county to this discussion sooner rather than later.
That's what I was gonna suggest. I was thinking, okay, so what's the alternative? What if this lease doesn't get renewed? Now there's this groin sitting out there, needs maintenance and repair, okay? And it sits on a county-owned beach. We don't own that land, and in fact, it's the state lands people.
Yeah.
So since it's a county beach that they maintain and control, and the state owns the land, I don't know what the alternative would be if we didn't have a lease. It would be up to the state and the county then to take over,
Yeah.
wouldn't it?
And
Yeah,
think
I don't
that
know.
would include the greater Fairlawns because they have jurisdiction for Bolinas Lagoon and out from Monterey.
It-
and
it- The
everything.
feds too.
And the coastal commission
Right.
should probably kick in.
What's coastal access?
Well, they don't want, the
Because
coastal
they'll
commission
access-
doesn't like
They're-
things like the groin, they
No.
don't
They
like
do like
riprap.
beaches for people to come.
They do like that, and you're gonna also, I think Rudy was part of this initial groin, right? So he's definitely the Rod and Boat Club. You're gonna find some pretty heated.
Oh,
supportive
of course.
stuff.
I mean, the problem is we're just dealing with the practical
Yeah.
nature. I mean,
Yeah.
literally, Rudy, while I was going through this, I'd read something that he posted in the hearsay. This was all around the EAC, but he was talking about, what a beautiful example the groin was of us meaning like the community, just
Yeah.
taking on this thing ourselves and just doing it and fixing, which is like, okay, it's beautiful, but now what?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably, we're coming up against reality, which is a lot of money, and we don't have the money to
No.
pursue this.
Well, that whole project came on because we were losing the beach and there was a lot of erosion, cliff erosion. And it was, a study concluded that if you put that groin up, you'd get a big sand buildup, which would then keep the ocean away from the cliff. And it all worked, you know? And so there was a guy named David Keller who lived in this community at the time, got a grant to, do most of the initial.
And that was the understanding that Jennifer described it, like why we got brought into it is that a public agency had to be the recipient for the grant.
Yes.
And that's why, it was essentially a community project, but somebody needed to receive the grant
Yeah.
funds, and then we became effectively the
Yeah.
applicant. We are co-applicants on it with the Highland community.
Yeah.
That's you, Kevin.
Well, Little Mesa.
Yeah.
I think in the letter to the attorney to have him look at this
Yes.
lease, I would like to get his opinion on the alternative of not having it renewed and
Yeah.
what are the options then.
Yeah, because I think to me what it is a review of the existing lease, because what are our commitments through that, right? So that one says you'll repair and maintain this thing. It says as a condition of building it, right? So we do have some responsibility associated with that existing lease.
But is it during the term of the lease?
I don't know.
Or
That's,
two?
but I'm just saying, like, that's basically, it's not just a review of the current lease.
Yeah.
It's like, if we're taking an off ramp, what is our commitment under the existing lease, right?
That's true.
So, and that's basically what I'm asking you for. Obviously, I'm not asking you to approve me entering into this lease. And in fact, I already let the State Lands Commission know, and they've removed it from their April meeting. They only meet every 2 months. So the idea is, if we had this all cleaned up by June, we could be back on their meeting. I'm sensing that may not even have this resolved by June.
Okay.
But it's basically directing me to get a proposal, probably from attorney. I could imagine that this is actually quite expensive. So I would prefer to just essentially have a small pot of money under your directive to pursue council support, and probably get a more formal proposal for review of this that I would bring forward at the April meeting.
Okay. Well, I think the money we set aside for the groin.
Yeah, that's true.
Definitely.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, then we'll just continue the item, but we're not going to authorize you to sign the lease. All
No, thank you.
right.
Is it possible to copy me on the correspondence for this?
To the council?
Or just with the, with everything,
Sure.
is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's all right.
I'm really curious, this groin is basically the reason there's a beach. And the reason that like the Little Mesa is still there. It's really important. And there's also been a groin of some type since like the 1880s.
Yeah.
Used to be a wood one.
Yeah.
And so I think this is like this could be like a precedent setting California thing.
Yeah.
Who takes over, how it gets done, if it gets protected, or if it has to be like left to decay and then the coastline gets exposed.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a really big issue for the town.
Yeah, I mean, not to mention that the structure itself presents liability. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like, well, you'll see in my manager's report in a second.
Okay.
Well, are we gonna violate a Brown Act if I'm gonna ask also to be copied on that correspondence? Because
No,
that's-
you could form I mean, this is on for action. So you guys, if you would like to, you can form a, what are they called? An ad hoc committee, and vote 2 members on there, or direct 2 members to join that committee, and they can be involved in the whole beach groin.
Well, I mean, I have an invested interest with the Rod and Boat Club and boats being able to get in and out of that channel, which I think is also serviced by the city. So yeah.
I think receiving copies of correspondence from the general manager is not a Brown Act problem.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to let you know, I mean, I talked to Jennifer about this. She was recommending that we work with council that had helped on the 100 Brighton, because that's kind of sort of, embedded in coastal commission issues, and that person had been really a good, like Jennifer had high recommendations for the lawyer who
Was
worked
that
with them.
Steve?
No, it was our
Our
representative. It was Janetta Rakanova or something.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't on that side.
yeah. That's right.
I am now.
Yeah, you are.
Sorry, did we just form an ad hoc committee?
Oh,
'Cause
no,
I would also
sorry.
be interested. I mean, I know there's, I live above the grind, so I'm also dependent on it, so not to throw too many hats in the ring, but I'm also interested to participate and learn. Is there a limit? Is it two?
Yeah, you'd have to have two. Otherwise, I mean, you could have more, but that would make it cumbersome because we'd have to have,
Can be.
Yeah.
yeah, we'd have to be compliant with the Brown Act. So I would say if you guys want to vote for 2 members, if there's 3 members that want to be on there.
We have to vote, do we have to have a committee to receive correspondence?
No, I don't think so.
No, especially, I mean, the thing is, as soon as council gets involved, then there's a lot more discretion because basically I can include you guys on those correspondence and it's all attorney-client privilege, and then it isn't have to be,
Not Brown Act because it's
Yeah.
confidential.
Yeah.
Mhm. But I think we're not at that stage yet. We would have to basically have essentially a finding that there's some, I mean, it's pretty obvious that there's legal implications.
That's where we're going.
Yeah.
So what do you
Let's
think
just
about
start with the communication. To those who are
Yeah.
interested or to all, and then
Yeah.
if we decide warrants committee.
Fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good. I mean, the first step is basically,
That's amazing.
yeah, I know. I want nothing to do with this project.
All right, I'm gonna keep going. Let's see, we've done 7, 8, 9, and 10. There's nothing, so on to managers update, item 11.
And
We're gonna get more water. I am, I think that it is.
Kirsten.
56 years, nobody said that before.
okay, can you guys see anything?
No, go for it.
They're very good.
It's a really good one.
Love it.
Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Bigger?
No.
There you go.
There you go.
That's it.
Oh, yes, I can. With the delay. Okay, so status of water supply. Things are looking like production and consumption over the last couple of months, heading into February, or all of February, looks very stable. This is, a general trend we see every month, or no, every month looking back at the last 2 years. We have a increase 4% over the previous year, comparing February this year to 2 Februarys ago.
Because the weather's been so nice.
Yeah, although it's just a general trend we've seen that after the drought, things really tightened, and then within the last 2 years, every month we see a little bit more usage.
I'm putting gardens in again.
This is basically our metered use. Just to remind you, this particular tranche we're looking at here is December, January, February in the Back Mesa. It tends to be a really tiny tranche, both probably because Back Mesa, I think, has fewer people, but also like there's actually fewer meters in that tranche, but also of the time of year.
Random question, where's Back Mesa start, like compared to say Jack's house or compared to the
Good.
Kale Hill or something?
Question.
How far back
It
is?
starts at Jeff Clapp's house, I believe. So
Oh,
sort
okay.
of that area towards BPUD office and
Oh, it's
down
not,
that
it's
direction.
not out Poplar, it's the Oak
It's-
Pine
As you-
Queen
as you
area.
go west.
Mm-hmm.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I mean it is out Poplar too, but it's kind of that whole tranche
Okay,
towards
thank
the
you.
west.
Yeah, it's just.
But that's a good point. I'm gonna bring a map next time.
Be so nice.
Okay. This is just our rainfall. We received 7 inches of rain in February. We looking at the cumulative since the beginning of the rain year, we're still slightly below historical average, which is 24.52. We're just like an inch or a half inch below that, or an inch and a half.
This could be a drought year.
Yeah.
Is that supposed to be an El Nino?
El Nino, that's what they're saying. Anymore.
And then this is just cumulative rainfall, just again, a little bit of narrow historic perspective. We're just slightly less at this point in the year than we were last year. Here is what the two impoundment structures look like. Sorry, I'm gonna. Can you hear anything? It's lower. Okay, that's what things looked like last month. And now this is this month. The upper. Okay.
You're getting feedback.
Yeah, just because I wanted to give a little audio. This is what the reservoirs look like. You may notice that there's no Azola. That's because we just removed it.
Looks good.
Yep. Moving on to leaks, we've had a leak on Grove, you guys may have noticed. That was like right at Grove and Elm. That was a Piazza job due to the fact that it was in the paved county right away. We cut out 4-inch of the wrap steel. That's the super problematic steel that we are always contending with, and cut in 8 feet of new C900. Similarly, this was a leak on the 400 block of Birch. Cut in 13 feet of new C900. This was, classic, effectively chasing a leak, and they finally just went in and purchased a big, went in and got new pipe. I only wish we could do that everywhere.
Hooray, really.
This is a leak that was ongoing on Cedar. Effectively, they cut out 50. This is a termination of that line towards Ocean Parkway there. They cut back 50 feet, capped it, and then they used that opportunity to actually put in a valve and put in a blow off, which is very nice for those termination points. Because the water quality can stagnate at the end of the line, and it's nice to have a blow off. And so that's basically 6 feet from this last service line along that main. That Hawthorne leak is still minor, but just letting people know in the public that we're still aware that there's a very tiny leak there. Just to dive into the Azola, this is before and after Azola. So for those, discerning people, you may be able to tell the difference. Aquatic Resource Management was out here. They did it within 2 days. We haven't received the invoice yet, but I'll let you know how much it cost once we get it. I think, Belle, what was it? It was usually around $7,000, $6,000.
Yeah, 6,000 to 7,000.
Mm-hmm.
Do they haul it away or is it just dumped on the side?
They
dump it.
They dump it, yeah. I think we end up with it.
It's there if anybody wants Azola.
People,
Mickey sometimes comes in.
I think so.
Yeah.
Observation.
Yeah.
Fertilization, I mean.
Yeah,
I wish we
maybe
could
it's
sell
worth
it.
just like letting people know on somewhere, like moving it. I don't know. It's really heavy, so it's just we don't want to be in a position where we're having to move it somewhere. because I think that would be quite a hefty cost. But maybe we could, supervise at some point people taking it. I'm not sure.
And a Zola day.
Yes. Pixelate it.
Okay, moving on to the Wells project. We continue to work on both of those. Just a reminder that involves work both at the resource recovery well as well as Mesa Park. And the 31 Wharf well is really moving into a next gear because that, as you probably have noticed, that project is underway. They're starting to do some of the excavation work. And that will include putting in retaining walls and flattening out surfaces for us to put in our treatment shed and the tank. So that's all very exciting. We basically have a 3-week window, it looks like, at the end of May or beginning of June, kind of in that realm, to do our portion of the project. Primarily the stuff that's like most disruptive that really needs to happen is basically embedding the water line that's going to go under the future driveway to the main on Wharf.
Are they sharing their construction schedule with you, or are you going to ask them?
No, they're very they interact with us a lot. And basically one other thing, I talked about this, but now this has been affected, which is basically DWR gave us an extension of the completion of the work to September 30th. The funds have effectively been exhausted, though. A lot of that is because we purchased all of these materials. So I'm not exactly, I mean, there's definitely going to be other money that needs to be expended. We brought in basically $200,000. I'm hoping that's enough to cover all of the costs associated with these projects. But obviously, it's very hard to predict because it's not a bidded project. We're doing it through primarily force account labor. So it's harder to predict exactly what the costs are associated with this project. Ocean Protection Council grant, just letting you guys know that continues. We've had the entirety of the collection system CCTV'd. They are moving over to the treatment side of things. But in addition, the force main was not CCTV. That's actually a pretty complicated endeavor to image the force main, and it's on our list of 5-year CIP. So we are basically moved it up in our 5-year CIP plan because it made sense for West Yost to manage that and plan that inspection while they were doing all of this other assessment of our system. And one other thing to point out related to, peripherally related to this, as you may or may not know, the county of Marin is oversees the septic systems in unincorporated Marin, and they have to prepare what is called their LAMP, their local agency management plan. And that is something that they, as a regulatory framework, must develop and submit to the regional board. And so that means they're doing a lot more outreach to the public around their management of systems. We also have public outreach embedded in our OPC grant. And so, I've just been communicating with Chris Chu at CDA to just ensure that, if they need us at a meeting with them when they're communicating with the public, there's an opportunity for BPUD representative to be there so that people in the community don't get super confused about these kind of dual efforts that are kind of happening simultaneously.
Briefly speak to what you mean about outreach to the community.
Well, you mean in terms of our own
or theirs?
Okay. Well, as an example, I think they had outreach that already happened at in Point Reyes Station. I think it's part of it is to collect feedback from people around hey, and again, this is very infancy. We are literally scheduling our meeting to can I see what materials you're sharing to the public so I can understand how that aligns with what, the same types of, you can imagine there's some overlap there, but basically around costs of putting in new septic systems, maybe the types of septic systems that they would allow, that kind of more technical and financial considerations when you're trying to think about how do you ensure that people have safe and treatment of their waste on their properties and what is the county's role in overseeing that and relaying that to the regional board. So again, I think it's like that's what I'm envisioning. At this, there's multiple stages of it. I think right now they're in a feedback stage where they're just like kind of trying to collect information from people, like impacted people in unincorporated Marin, and doing these kind of satellite meetings around unincorporated Marin, gathering that information. They'll incorporate that into their LAMP. I think there's also opportunity later to, then return to those communities and let them know what the LAMP has included. So again, I'm not exactly sure on the very specific ways that it would make sense for us to overlap, but as you can imagine, our grant is specifically to get folks that are on, it's a feasibility study to get people, the most vulnerable on-site wastewater systems in our community off of those systems and into our onto our treatment facility. So you can imagine there's some overlap there, but exactly what that's going to look like, I'm not sure. We now have 90 participants. Belle and I were, and Annie is out this week, but we have discussed this idea of having a surprise gift for our 100th.
That's such a good idea.
Yes. So it's really a surprise because Belle and I don't even know what this gift is yet. But if you guys have any really good ideas, please send them our way.
I still think we need merch.
Yes.
I think it would be fun.
Yeah, that's kind of the direction we were going. And we were going to basically, if you guys are supportive, we'll probably put some notice on Nextdoor and try to ramp up some interest in our surprise gift.
I would be one of the 100. I don't know.
I know.
But I already signed up, so I don't know.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll do a lottery of all participants
I
and the
like
100th
that.
one.
Honor of the 100.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Finally, it's worth it. A quick update on the pedestrian bike path. I published the notice of exemption for that, both at the county clerk and in the state clearinghouse. There's effectively a 35-day period that I'm waiting to lapse before we submit our coastal development permits. I decided that's just probably a smoother way to be able to say, hey, we have a notice of exemption and it's gone through its notice period, and we can essentially formalize that in our application itself. Letting folks know there's a free toxic away day when Saturday, March 28th, and you can book your appointment online following that QR code.
Did they cancel it this time?
They did cancel it. This is the new date. I've
Good.
been told that this is real.
What was the date?
March 28th, 9 to 1 p.m. Okay. As you can see, here's the beautiful groin we were just talking about, and the stairs are in disrepair. So what I would like to do is remove as much of this metal as possible and replace it with wood. So that we're getting a quote for that currently. Just a brief update on the garbage situation. We continue to work on this. I think this is an earlier version that I've uploaded. Basically, the only thing that I wanted to say is that I've communicated with folks at the county. I would really like to get formal commitment from them to either help fund, garbage collection, because similar to what we were just talking about at the groin, this is their beach. The fact that we are getting involved in the garbage collection is like something that I'm not fine with, but I recognize, like, to, Grace's point, like, if nobody does it, then it's not going to get done. So it's fine for BPUD to be kind of pushing towards this. It is, in that case, very appropriate for the county to help fund those efforts.
It's indistinguishable from Agate Beach.
Triple.
Yeah, I get it. The thing I talked to folks at the county about that because I was kind of pushing on that end, and it turns out that's actually a park.
State park.
No, a county
Oh,
park.
county
The
park.
garbage, I'm sorry, the garbage can is a county park. But almost. It's like the parking lot is a county park. So that's the distinction in their mind. But I'm actually going to try to peruse examples of garbage at beach entrances at county where they effectively are involved in that because I think that it's probably not that. I'm guessing there's parts of Stinson that are also county park. So there's state park and then there's county. So basically doing some sleuthing around, I mean, I don't want to be like C County, you know, but it's just like you need to provide some examples of, hey, this is already a precedent that you yourself set. Why are you not providing that level of support
Right.
at this beach?
Yeah.
And I think it's also like you have a partner here. We're willing to do some administration and work with the Bolinas Community Center around supporting this. So maybe the easiest thing for them to do is like to provide the receptacles and provide some nominal annual funding toward it.
Does BPUD own that? Sorry, does Rod and Boat Club own that?
Yeah, that portion, and that's why it's multi-agency.
Yeah,
Yeah. That portion of Wharf.
that location, is there not a concern around title? I mean, I thought.
I think the idea is for it to be secure, so none of the garbages have been secured yet, but I think
In the
that,
past.
so to have them these like really firm structures that are then anchored into the ground. And Bob Kraus is here to, obviously this wasn't formally agendized, but this is, I've told you about Bob for several meetings. He was, along with Isabel Winstead, involved in bringing, having meetings with me and talking about this idea of Bolinas's energy independence and resiliency. And just to point out that he's still pursuing these efforts, but really needs a champion in the community to essentially get buy-in from a broader set of the community. Otherwise, it's such an uphill battle to pursue this and really not worthwhile until you've built sort of that grassroots momentum. I mean, Bob, you're welcome to speak to this. I just wanted to, this is also, I'm sorry that this is an earlier version of my presentation that I hadn't updated within the last, because Bob and I got to meet today. But Bob, you'll be presenting at the Bolinas Civic Group meeting on the 11th of April. Is that, no, 8th of April. On the Wednesday, and just again making that push towards, are there folks in the community who are really interested in, and again, it's not as I would say as ambitious or as heavy of a lift of basically purchasing PG&E infrastructure. That's not the direction of this. It's more a direction of developing some microgrids and energy independence through that route, and even maybe some stepping stones even leading up to that level of kind of infrastructure development. So Bob, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit to the board.
Well, yeah, let me just frame it, we've been working, there's a team behind me, we've been working for about 4 years on this strategy we call modern public power. And so, as Georgia says, it's not about taking over PG&E, it's about running something in parallel. So you guys already have latent ability to run an electrical utility. You guys would get that final stamp from the LAFCO, the Marin LAFCO, and then it would be opt-in. Whoever wants it, and maybe BPUD is the first one that wants it. You put in solar and batteries, lowers the costs, makes you less reliant on PG&E, and everything's happening behind the meter. So PG&E really, on some level, isn't really involved. The CPUC is not involved. It's a very light touch where it's much more doable than trying to take over PG&E assets. But the thing is that, you know, I have an outside role, and so somebody within the community has to build something to bring in front of you guys. And so
What do you have in mind when you say build something?
a proposal.
Oh, okay.
Mhm. And then, you know, obviously you guys would be aware of that proposal in its development, but ultimately you guys would vote either for or against. And only then would you guys have the ability from a regulatory standpoint to actually, start putting some stuff in. And so, so yeah, I've been, again, as an outsider with everybody, you know, I saw Simon today, he's on 2 different committees, and I mean, I see you guys here for 3 hours, and you know, everybody really puts their heart and soul into everything, but finding that excess bandwidth is kind of tough. We would provide a lot of the support that you need, both before and after, but somebody has to take the lead. And it's like Georgia said, it's really about having the community be aware of what are we talking about, and do we agree? Is this something we want to do or not? And that's something you guys need to do yourselves. So so we're here to help. And just to be clear, you know, we're not a consulting firm, we're not anything. We're doing this all pro bono. You know, just I don't know, do you guys get paid? You don't get paid, do you?
Oh, we make many.
A little bit. Yeah, but it's mission. So
Yeah.
that's what we're doing, and we're doing it across the state. So Bolinas would be one of the first ones. So you'd help everybody else see, you know, how it's done.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So I might be totally off here. I've read a little bit about renewable energy certificates, whereas like you're essentially
Right.
buying like good clean energy, but you don't need the infrastructure. Is that a completely separate thing than like potentially setting up our own utility or grid here in terms of like the value that we'd be getting with interdependence from PG&E?
It would be it would be separate. So, you know, there's this line in the sand, which is your the meter, everybody's meter, our meter, right? And the way that this modern public power strategy is laid out is that you start just like Sunrun does, or any solar installer, you put solar and batteries in, it's behind the meter. And the cost of that power, when you factor in the CapEx and the OpEx, it's much lower than what PG&E's been charging. And oh, by the way, when you know there's a interruption in power, you still have your lights on.
Yeah.
And so you do a lot of that. You build up those assets behind the meter. The financing is lower. There are no stockholders that you've got to give a return to. And so the cost of the energy of all the municipal power in the state of California, there's 43 municipal utilities. The average cost is 45% of what the investor-owned utilities charge on a unit basis for power. And so you guys would start participating at that level, but and then and at some point you could choose as the operator of this municipal utility to actually start stringing your own lines between properties, create a cluster as well. And so just like when you have solar power, it's available on an as available basis. When the sun's shining, you've got power, so you don't have to buy any from PG&E, right? Well, if you start stringing lines to a cluster of homes, like, you know, you might have great exposure and your neighbor has a big tree. And so by hooking multiple houses together, you have a community level resource. Do the same thing with batteries and so forth, so that you're sharing those resources. And so you would have 2 meters. You'd still have your PG&E meter. And then you'd have this other meter that you're producing and consuming. And your total bill would be much less. But PG&E is always there for backup when they're up. And so that's simplified. That's what the gist of the whole thing is.
Okay.
And for folks who are already on solar array system and battery backup, they would have the option to convert over.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it fits what's already in the ground. Because there's a lot of, right now, there's a lot of have and have nots. Those that have a personal balance sheet that can afford to put that in, they've got it, and the other people don't. And by doing it through a municipal utility, you can put it on the bill. You know, it's on bill financing. And so it's not going on their balance sheet, which couldn't support it. It would go on BPUD's. And so, you know, so the financing, the way financing works is you have, there's two kinds of bonds that you can float, muni bonds. There's general obligation bonds and there's revenue bonds. And so revenue bonds are, you know, as the name implies, and they're paid off with the revenue that's generated from the assets that you buy with the money you borrowed. And so, you know, the Wall Street people, they lend the money, you put the systems in, and then once that starts generating the revenue, those bonds get sold off because they get paid by the electricity that's being generated, and you got a new tranche of money. And then you go do it again. And again, you get this flywheel going. And then again, you know, as you start stringing things together, creating these clusters, then you can join the clusters together. And at some point, you might actually connect up with the grid, but that's 5-10 years down the road. And that's optional too. You don't necessarily have to do that. You could stay all behind the meter. You could just create a few community resources that are localized, so you're not stringing a lot of power lines. Or you could go full muni, just the way things have been for the last 100 years.
So the infrastructure, let's say it's solar panels are the primary source of the energy. The BPUD then would own those, but install them on people's backyard. Is that the idea?
Or roof, yeah.
Oh, yeah, I meant on their property.
Mhm.
And then the wires would go to a more centralized, et cetera,
Initially, they would just be for that customer,
for that customer.
right? You'd be one of their power companies,
Uh-huh.
right? So as long as there's power there, and again, you might put a battery in there as well, so that even when the sun's not out, you know, at night, you still have power. And only when the battery's dry and the sun's not shining, then the power comes in from PG.
But the panels, the wiring, the battery, all of that, that's purchased and owned by the BPUD?
That's right.
And that person is one of our customers. So people buy in to effectively be a customer. It's not like everyone in our LAFCO jurisdiction is a customer in this model.
Right.
You effectively
Choice,
So-
opt in.
opt in, and then they would have, you know, I mean, again, I think obviously we're not going to work through all of the details
No,
right
it's just-
here. But and just to be clear, I mean, we've obviously talked about these kinds of efforts. Obviously, I mean, I feel that this is much more reasonable than some of the other
Yeah.
sort of models that were brought before us. And so I still feel that we don't have the bandwidth to carry this to, you know, fruition, even at the level of a proposal that's brought before you. But I do want to say that I've, you know, been communicating with Bob. I'm really supportive of this. And as much as we are basically kind of able to do some limited work that formalizes that outreach so that people are more likely to be involved because it's an effort that BCPUD is championing. That's sort of what I'm hoping happens. I'm hoping that somebody comes out of the woodwork that's really interested in this. We've also talked about maybe what we're doing is submitting for a couple of small grants that effectively pay that person to, you know, that is community embedded and is really passionate about this issue, but maybe doesn't have the means to just volunteer the hundreds of hours that this is going to require. And so they effectively have a stipend to work on, you know, effectively our behalf to see, like Bob has communicated, it's really important to have buy-in from the community before you really make those next level of investments. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I'm, you know, big picture hoping our involvement is at this stage. So just very concretely, Bob is presenting at the BCG meeting. I said, present at that meeting. Maybe somebody in the audience is going to hear about that, or we already have kind of a list of folks that Bob has kind of done outreach to, but they're still not super responsive, and probably convening a meeting of those, whoever comes out of the BCG meeting, but also some kind of handpicked individuals that could sort of similar to this meeting right now, where we talk about, and gauge somebody's interest and their willingness to either they know somebody, or like I said, they're willing to submit for, help plan for the grant or whatever, what exactly that next step looks like to really formalize this effort. I'm not sure, but I just think it's worthwhile for us to have the limited involvement to try to help push this to the next level.
So exploration first.
Yeah.
Oh, we're interested.
That's great.
It's great.
Thank you.
Good.
No, thank you.
All right, so if anybody can think of, somebody who might be able to step forward.
Yeah.
And I'm learning that as an outsider, I'm not the person to make the approach either. It'd be better if it came from you guys, right? I mean, I'll do whatever you guys need as long as it's effective, but I'm finding it's not very effective. So if you guys can find somebody really who can support it very strongly throughout the whole process, but it should be homegrown. It has to be homegrown.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for
And
coming.
I'm sorry if we didn't move you up on the
Yeah.
agenda.
Yeah.
I feel like, I'm sorry that you had to wait for so long.
Yeah, it was a little awkward because it was embedded into my manager's
I know.
report, so I told him, I kind of forewarned him, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to slosh
Also
right.
interested in what the mojo between you guys.
Yeah, right.
You guys have a great, you have a great karma going. Good to see.
Good for it.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Bob.
for all your effort.
All right, George, does that finish up your
Yep, that's the end of the manager's
managers?
update.
Okay, well, already did item 12. Item 13 is the automated meters from
Ooh,
Becca.
Jeez, I really loaded this meeting.
Yeah, you did.
Sorry. Yeah, so again, this is just kind of top level. I mean, I think at some level what I was trying, I don't feel like I need for you guys to be involved at a super kind of leads in the weeds, but I just wanted to present what effectively has been an effort over the last couple of months. Convey that, this is primarily something that I'm pursuing with Annie. And so Annie and I have met with representatives of Subeka, which I've presented you guys a brief overview of this, but this is effectively a hardware and software interface that would allow us to read meters on an hourly basis every day. And it piggybacks on Amazon Sidewalk. We received the piece of hardware equipment that allows us to effectively ping to that kind of like network so that we could gauge the likelihood that this option would be, effective here. And it's sort of, as you can imagine, a mixed bag, but you can see some of that data. And but it looks very promising. The other thing that we've done is gotten a proposal from them. You probably also saw there was a lot of back and forth questions that I had. I think they were really thorough in answering them. And then the other thing that I think was, a big part of our due diligence was to reach out to references. And for the most part, those references have been really positive. And the other real big perk of this particular option is that it's very easy to pilot. Depending on the type of technology that you're pursuing, a very common AMI, is to actually build a network where this meter talks to this meter that talks, so you build basically a mesh network, and then it comes back to like a server here, or it could ping to the cloud here, but basically you need to get it to a centralized location. Well, you can imagine piloting that is extremely difficult because you need to build the network in order to, and the stability of that network can be very nuanced, right? So it might be like, okay, let me pilot and try to build the small network and see how well that works. Well, building it in that one space, if you then change the topology and all of that to kind of mimic, to essentially use that pilot to predict what it's going to look like everywhere is really difficult. So that's not a direction that I really wanted to go. And I definitely wanted to pilot something before we make this kind of investment. And so the nice thing about this is that it's basically, cloud-based right away. So you're essentially sending that signal to somebody's, Amazon Ring, I don't really know, but basically their hardware, and that sends it to you're piggybacking on that cloud-based network. So that means that, you could add a single device and test whether it's working. And the proximity to an existing hardware, like, the Amazon, like the stability of the Amazon Sideway network is going to be predictive of whether that will work there. So the idea is on top of that, you have these like kind of boosters, these LAN boosters that will help that strengthen the network. So based on the data collection we did, it looks like we'd likely have to have 2 of those. Not in the pilot. I don't think that's appropriate. I think what we're looking at is how robust is it without those. And so the overall, there's some complexity around the technology itself. There's what is called a wired pin, and there's a wireless pin. So the wireless, on our existing meters right now, you can essentially just adapt the meter, put this device on there, but it's not quite as strong of a signal. The wired pin needs to be effectively on a device that receives it. So we would essentially have to get new meters for that. I think what the idea of the pilot is we fold this into what is our need to change out old meters anyway. So the pilot is like 60-40. It's like 60% wired pins, and actually I think it's 100 devices. I'm not sure if that was the right number. Maybe it was down to 60, but basically you have, a handful, let's just say it's 100. So 60 wired pins, wireless pins. Those are on our existing Badger meters. We pick them in an area that we're, trying to have data that's going to be as predictive as possible for, the entirety of our meters. And then the wired pins, we replace our oldest meters in discrete spots where, again, we want to collect that same data, and then we insert the wired pins. So we're collecting all of this data at once, and we're able to assess both, what is the difference of the wired versus the wireless in terms of signal strength. And then there's one other sort of technical thing to bring up, which is basically ultrasonic devices that are effectively digital in nature versus mechanical meters. So all of our meters now are mechanical, and you can, easily define the sort of pros and cons of a mechanical meter and an ultrasonic meter. So, but on the, quick summary of that is basically mechanical meters, because there's mechanical components, they degrade with time, and often they degrade in a way that you essentially get less water, like you underestimate the amount of water that somebody's using. Okay, so and that's why I'm saying that, we know how old a lot of our meters are, and that they should be swapped out every like 10 to 15 years. Okay, so we have a lot to pick from. But basically that's, one type. And then the other thing is that they're not as sensitive. So the ultrasonic meters are last longer. They have a battery that's going to determine the overall lifespan of the device, but they are way more sensitive. So they can do things like nominal leak detection and all of that. So effectively, though, that is like essentially metadata that's incorporated into that actual meter. So along with that hourly data, what you would get is like, small leak detected. that's basically a signal that's being transmitted to the Subeka wired pin in this case. So basically the pilot sort of describes all of that. And I, again, don't want to overwhelm you with details. I think I'm more trying to impart that, you know, the staff has done our due diligence around we want to pursue this pilot. We like the company. I mean, one of the things I would say in terms of our outreach to people was invariably people talked about how great it was to work with them. That's also probably part of the downside, and you'll see that reflected in the questions, which is effectively they're a startup. So, you know, if they get purchased or, you know, fail, some of it is around like what happens to our data, or, you know, I mean, obviously we can't guarantee what the level of support is like if they get sold to one of these larger, you know, Badger or whatever. But anyway, but I'd say part of them being a startup is that people talk about how great they've been to work with and how supportive they are and all of that. So I think there'll be a ton to be learned. Like even if ultimately we decide not to go with them, it is to have a company that's very supportive in that effort. We will learn a ton through that process. If at the end of it we don't pursue the pilot, a big part of the cost breakdown is actually investment in those ultrasonic meters that we, you know, need to replace anyway. So, and then effectively the pilot that I am favoring is a rental of that equipment. It's a pilot for 3 months. We would essentially have a investment, like I said, of the replacement of some of those meters that are going to be compatible with the wired pin, with the wired pin. And then the other ones that are essentially renting the device on top of our existing meters. So that's basically
So,
it.
on the first page on the memo that you wrote, and you're showing that budget, a $2,400 device rental, 60 units at $40.
Mhm.
So we're renting those 60 units for the 3-month period?
Mhm.
And if we decided to buy them, could we apply that towards the purchase price?
Honestly, I asked that in the questions. I don't remember his answer. I think it was no. We could lease them and maybe purchase them outright, but the rental was like basically lost cost.
Okay, so.
Or lost cost.
So your budget of 16,560 is just to conduct the 3-month pilot to see how it works, and then we start from scratch if we wanted to go.
Yeah, but you can see a 6,000 of this, and this is what I'm talking about, is ultimately investment that's independent of the pilot.
Right.
6,000 is the 20 Camstrep ultrasonic meters.
Yeah.
So those are effectively, hey, we're just purchasing these meters that we otherwise need to replace. We're purchasing them with maybe fancier devices than we would otherwise want because they're, you know, they're ultrasonic in nature. They're not mechanical. I can look at the cost difference, but meters are expensive. So that's one way to, you know, it's not going to be like twice as expensive for these.
Right.
And also it then means that you have capabilities that you didn't have before. So for example, if we went in a different direction, that's one of my questions is ultimately this is, you know, a very well-established company in the meter world. So if we went with another AMI, you know, there are options for that hardware and software to interface with those specific digital meters. And again, if we ultimately went over to all of this, the kinds of like, and you basically have you know, some of these kind of more established customer portal interfaces, like you can see all kinds of instantaneous water consumption from your house and all of that kind of stuff. Again, just to reiterate, like the data that we'd be collecting from Subeka is every hour, so you're not getting that granular data. But what you are getting is essentially that meta tag associated with that ultrasonic data, where it's like small leak detected. You know, right? So it's like, it's basically, it looks at the pattern of usage and it, you know, essentially infers from that, okay, something is wrong here, battery low, like all of those kinds of things that tell somebody, oh, I need to go look at this meter, something's going on, or let the customer know. Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I read through this fairly thoroughly, but it was a little while ago. Who owns the data?
We own the data. I mean, I don't know if that means exclusively we own the data, but we basically take that data with us. So that's, whether they use that data some other way, I don't know.
That's what I was, yeah. I mean, I don't know that you can avoid that, but it is a question.
Yeah, I think, I can look into sort of if there's any avoiding those types of issues.
I'd be interested to just get more clarity around that.
Okay.
I'm not, I've been dealing with, therapy notes programs and taken by AI, and it's like, don't touch it. Cause it's not, it's not secure.
Yeah.
So I just think that we need to be fully informed. I'm not against this in any way. I just think we need to know.
Yeah, it should be.
Yeah.
secure. So what's your plan? I mean, what's the next step?
I think what I will do is, this isn't on for action, but I just wanted to present this to you to give you guys your overall sense. I will come back with a formal proposal from them. I'm thinking, likely though, what I want to do is at the time that that proposal is brought forward, I'm going to lean on them to help me develop the pilot. Like you can imagine what we're looking at is, okay, here is the Amazon data from Amazon Sidewalk, which tells us where signal is good, bad, and whatever. And then you can imagine we have, it looked like 60 data points, right? So now we have 60 meters, 20 of them, the wired pins of the ultrasonic, where we're looking at, okay, based on where we have old meters on top of this map, where do we want to, effectively plant those meters? Where do we want to put the other 40 wireless ones? So that's,
Okay.
and that once it's at that stage and I have firm numbers, then I would come back for a request for you guys to approve a proposal. My idea was, and the finance committee already knew about this because I previewed this in the meeting with them, is to fold in the cost of this pilot as, essentially a first step in a CIP. So, essentially the budget that I built for next year incorporates this 16,500 into it. So the idea, ideally you guys would be approving it this year. It would be contingent on approval of the budget itself, and it would start this summer.
All right.
It's kind of.
I have a couple quick questions.
Mhm.
We'll do rapid fire. Excited to see this moving forward. by the
Yeah.
way. Very supportive. Sorry, you talked a little bit about this, but I wasn't quite sure what you meant. Does this system alert the customer or does it alert BPUD? Like, I'm just.
Yeah, I didn't get into that. The pilot will not delve into a customer interface. What it is going to be a portal that is for us.
Okay.
Us as the major, the mega customer.
Yeah.
And we would look at this and we could alert customers like, hey, something weird's going on with your meter, right? Obviously, we could do none of that and we could just fold it into our billing system. It's like I met with somebody from Marin Water, who was one of the people that was piloting this on Monday or something. And, to convey to them, like, because they were like, one thing that's really annoying is that sometimes it won't collect data for 7 hours and then it treats that all as one usage on the 7th hour. And I'm like, okay, that's annoying, but our bar is very low. We go and collect meter data every quarter and it's a nightmare to deal with. So basically to have even if it was a 24-hour data point, it's so substantially improved from the status quo.
Yeah. What else you got?
Yeah. As a Subika rep, been out to see our meters because our meters aren't in basements; they're out in the dirt for the most part, I think. And these, like, do we feel confident? I guess the trial will tell, but we feel confident that these will work out.
Yeah, so this is basically the wireless pin. So that's part of, I don't understand truly the technological difference between a wireless and wired, but structurally, part of the reason that one is more has a better signal is that it's literally a device that sticks up out of the meter box. So there's meter box, like, these are very prevalent and becoming more and more prevalent for AMIs.
Okay.
And you have a special meter lid that accommodates this. And part of the reason that the signal is so strong is that basically it's emerging from the box. Whereas the other ones are placed, they literally, you just like remove the analog register, and then you just put this meter register on there, and now you have it in the box itself, right? And so the signal is not as strong because of that. I think there's additional underlying like technological differences between the two hardware that make one of the signals stronger than the other, but that's basically the difference. So yes, definitely for all of these things, you can have issues where like somebody parks their car over a meter box and that interferes with the relay of the signal to the cloud.
Yeah.
So
Or they run it, I mean, like, I couldn't have one that sticks up because people park over my water meter all the time, so they would just run it over, or
it's just flush with the lid is my understanding, so it's not really
Sticking up.
it's not sticking up.
Alright, yes, real quick, I was wondering if with this system, are there any like system-wide monitoring benefits that BPUD could get other than just the individual ones? Is there anything that we could put on our like system-wide, any sort of monitoring upgrades we can do, we can fold it?
Internally, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
like at the plant or just somewhere along the lines, any sort of additional monitoring we could do.
Yeah, I'm not sure, I can think about that.
Okay. And then do customers have a choice with this? Is this like an opt-in thing, or is it if we like it, is it something that we will just blanket and just want to put everybody on?
I don't know, we could decide that later. I think that's a
Yeah.
board level decision.
Yeah.
And let's see, the other thing I was gonna say something about, sorry, keep going.
Okay, last one. Speaking of customers,
Oh, that's what I was gonna say, sorry.
yeah.
Because I didn't touch on that, but the other thing I included in these materials is basically there's a billing software company that is third party that you could engage in, effectively. What that would do is we would replace our billing software, and this thing would directly communicate with that. So it would take over that piece of it. And then the other third party is a customer portal. So, and that also includes billing. So it's basically like, how much do you want to pay to augment the service? Obviously, some of it is replacing existing service. So that was what the analysis that I'd asked Annie to run, which was really nominal because our billing software is so cheap. So effectively, and the other thing is they have the ability, because one of the things we want to get up and running is basically an alert system to customers, so that instead of going on Nextdoor, we can just like, polygon out like, hey, you are all the impacted customers. So effectively what I asked Annie to do was, hey, can you look at like our most likely option for, augmenting our ability to alert customers plus our existing billing system, and compare it to the cost of going with one of these third party on top of the Subeka. And it was really nominal.
Okay.
So because effectively, you can imagine, well, this software is doing more than that. And also we've picked the cheapest billing company ever.
Yeah.
So
Okay. I mean, we had to fight for those 91s, and now we have to start over with a
yeah, I know, right?
Okay, last one. We've been encouraging our customers to get smart, water detector systems, the flow, things like that. Are those compatible with these systems, or maybe they will be made redundant?
Well, it depends on whether it's, we purchase effectively the customer portal, because right now what I'm describing is just on our our side of things. But if we did go with that, then you, I guess, could argue that they're redundant. But it just depends. I'm not exactly sure what the resolution of the flume is. As I've spoken of before, I have an automated meter shut off, and the data I get is more higher resolution than what we would have with Subeka.
We might want to keep the flume.
Yeah, and I think in terms of structural compatibility, it should be fine because basically all of the hardware that is we're talking about is on top of the existing register. It's my understanding is that the flume is attached to the pipe adjacent to the meter register.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else on this subject? No, so you'll just come back to us maybe with a more concrete proposal that asks for
Yeah.
authorization? Great,
Mhm.
sweet, I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on, potential for committee updates, non-bolded items are not for discussion. And the only one that's bold is Finance Committee, which says see item 22.
Yep.
So let's drop down to item 21. And these are approval of the regular meeting minutes of February the 18th, 2026. Does anyone have any changes or corrections on those minutes? And if not, can I get a motion to approve them?
I move to approve.
Okay, is there a second? Somebody?
I'll second.
Thank you.
I wasn't here.
I wasn't there, so I won't vote.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Yeah. Aye. Number 22, Finance Committee meeting of February 12th, 2026. I wasn't there, but I'll vote for them anyway.
Yeah. Do we want the?
Any changes or corrections for the people who are familiar with what was said?
I didn't see the minutes on the board drive.
I don't see them either, and also, sorry, the whole automated meters, I don't see that on the drive. Have you seen that, Andrew?
The one we just talked about?
I have.
Yeah, I got
I
that.
got that.
Okay, it's not.
I didn't see any finance stuff though when I downloaded it.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry.
You want to read them right now?
We can bring them back to the next meeting. Sorry about that if they didn't get on there.
It sounds like we have a lot of faith in the
They're-
process.
They're called otter something something. They start with the word otter.
Well, I'm gonna
I
try to
don't
get
know.
approval.
Yeah.
It doesn't
All right,
say
okay.
item 22.
Yeah, it does, yeah.
Yeah, I don't
I
have it.
got 'em.
so-
Okay,
Okay.
I noticed there's a ghost in the machine. I think it repeated a line 3 times, but I'll just
Oh.
leave it there for you guys. to
Oh.
discover.
We can look at them next time.
Yeah.
okay.
Next.
Well,
We don't have to approve them now.
well, the minutes, the document that I've got in my binder here starts out with the date of March 12th, actually, and the agenda says February 12th, but I assume it's the same meeting that we're talking about.
Oh yeah, that's March.
That's you mean March 12th, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, can I go ahead and ask for a motion to approve the March 12th Finance Committee minutes, or do we continue them with whatever? Sounds like some people haven't seen them.
Yeah, that's fine. I don't think it's a big deal to bring them back once you
All right.
guys have an opportunity
Okay.
to review them.
In that case, we'll move on to item 23, which is the warrants for the month of February. Anybody have any questions or comments on the warrants?
Yeah.
I didn't get the ones.
Oh,
What is going on?
Up to you guys.
I don't know. I have always had problems with the board site. But I
Can I
don't.
just go and
I
download
downloaded everything
everything?
at 3 today and those things weren't there and I'm positive they were kept.
oh,
That's so weird. Because yeah, they were all there before
You have them.
3 p.m.
Yeah.
Like if you go to the board site right now, can you see them?
I don't know.
Okay.
Right now, hold on.
I don't have a list. Never mind.
February warrant list.
Yeah, I just go,
Yeah.
I click all and then hit download and
Me too.
it often doesn't get a lot of.
See, I'm looking at it directly off the board site, and then I click them one at a time and.
Yeah, they're on there now.
yeah, you got it?
Okay, then maybe there's something about the transfer and the download. 'Cause
Mm-hmm.
I just,
Have you seen them, Kevin?
There they are.
I haven't seen them yet. I've had warrants, yep. I don't have any I don't have any comments on the warrants, so.
Okay. Well, how about if you make a motion to approve?
I'm willing to do that. So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
I,
Aye. Okay, that gets us to
yeah,
incoming correspondence, materials to be signed, we can take care of that. Future agenda items, I think you have notes on that. Do you not?
Oh, did we get the incoming correspondence in there, Belle? No. Okay, I think we'll have to-
No, what was that again? I can't
That was
remember.
from, actually, I don't know if they ever responded to us. That's maybe
No, I
what
don't.
happened.
Yeah.
My hand
There was,
Janine has her hand up.
oh, okay.
No, and that's been up for hours.
Oh, Janine
Yeah.
has? Okay.
No.
She's there. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Did you not get the incoming correspondence? Because Randy from the community center and I sent a number of letters. Did those?
Yeah, we did, Janine, but I think we sent a email to you, letting you know that that would have to come before a public meeting. Belle, are you remembering what I'm remembering?
Yeah, and just whether or not, and we wanted to make sure that was okay. I can't remember what we said in our email or.
Sure. My understanding is that it couldn't be discussed right now, but it could be brought up, and it would have to be agendized for another meeting. But I was just wondering if the board had a chance to read it. And
no, and sorry, Janine, that got lost in translation. Basically, I just wanted to make sure that you guys were comfortable with that letter coming forward and incoming correspondence, because if we directed that to the board,
yeah,
it would have to surface in a public meeting. And I just generally want because sometimes people aren't aware that if they send me something and then I forward it to the board, it has to come in as incoming correspondence and then it gets publicly daylighted. So I just am always in the custom of getting an explicit response from folks to say, yes, I'm fine with that letter being shared publicly. So sorry that I didn't explain that well in the email.
yeah, that wasn't understood. Basically, it's about the public benefits package for the seawall project. And I think it's important, and not now, but to discuss it. Because of your involvement and of course AMJT, Pincus, and the effects on the visiting public. And this is a one-time chance to make certain impacts, just as it is with the Agate Beach situation. So I guess the next step would be to actually have the letter get to you, have the information get to you. So,
yeah, and then I think basically too, if you want to discuss that, then it makes more sense for us to just agendize it. We can bring the letter forward and then the board can actually have an opportunity to have a back and forth discussion with you, and you can make a specific request that they could entertain.
okay. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll bring it forward at the next meeting.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks.
So then talking about future agenda items, you already have a list of what we're gonna talk about.
Yep, including that item.
Okay. Next meeting date,
April.
is it the 15th?
Tax day.
Tax day.
Yep.
Exciting.
And then we have some other meetings. The 13th, I believe we have is it the 13th though?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Monday the 13th at 3:30. So just reminding people that should be on people's calendars.
And then the 15th, there's a special meeting,
Yeah,
closed session.
similar to today, split into two parts. Ideally, I'll address that with you guys because you'll have already done tonight's closed session. You'll have a good sense of whether there's enough time. I think the issue is whether actually I wanted to discuss this. Sorry, now I'm remembering. Andrew, I don't think you can be at the 15th meeting.
I don't think so.
Yeah, so whether you guys want to move, we could have a single closed session like you guys did tonight and move the other discussion of rights of way into its own closed session and have it stand alone as a special meeting. It's really up to you guys, and I guess primarily Andrew, how much you feel like you want to be at that other meeting.
You're talking about the 13th? Like, could we move the special meeting
Yeah.
from the 15th to the 13th and tack it on to the other special?
Yeah, we could do that if that's better.
Makes more sense.
Okay, we would probably tack it on to the end of it.
Okay.
Because that's a budget meeting, right? 13th?
Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so now the board
Yeah, I'll just, I mean, administrative, like we can deal with these logistics via email. So I need to first make sure that council can attend a meeting on the 13th before we get carried away doing that. So I will just deal with those logistics via email with you guys.
That's a closed session on the 13th.
And a special.
15th.
Yeah, from 3:30.
I think we would move the closed session entirely to the 13th. Was that what I was thinking? That way
Yeah,
Andrew can be
okay.
attended.
That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, so we would have probably the open special meeting on the 13th from 3:30. I'm expecting that to take about an hour and a half or so. And then you guys could move into close, or we could move into closed session after that.
All right.
And ideally for both items, that should take around a half an hour. It actually gives us more flexibility too if we want to expand that time a little bit, because then it's after and it's not the hour before our regular meeting.
That seems fair.
Okay, meeting adjourned.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Val.
Yeah. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.